Hurry up and just do your job right, Gerald Pike snapped. Annie, don't try to act like you understand everything. Annie faltered. No, sir. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted. She tried again. No, sir. There's something not right with the ingredients lately. Gerald looked at her. Something not right, he repeated. Annie nodded. The seafood code doesn't match the invoice. The delivery time says 5:40, but the truck came after 7. And the price on the beef is almost double what it was last month. But the quality, are you intentionally wasting time so you don't have to work? Gerald cut in. I'm not trying to waste time, she said. But please, sir, just check it one more time. I'm not pretending, she added, keeping her voice low. The invoice says these are fresh day, boat scallops, but the tag on the crate doesn't match the supplier code, and the smell is off. He pointed toward the crates of vegetables. Then hurry up and wash that pile of greens, and don't pretend to complain about anything in here. Sir, if this goes on the line, enough. Gerald stepped closer. His voice dropped, so only the people nearest could hear. You do not question purchasing. You do not question approved suppliers. And you do not stand in my kitchen acting like a little notebook makes you an expert. Annie, he said, almost politely now, which somehow made it worse, please remember exactly what your job is. You receive deliveries, wash vegetables, label containers, and disappear from the walkway. You do not teach me how to run $1 million restaurant. Gerald noticed the old notebook in her apron pocket. And stop writing down company business like you're some kind of inspector. It helps me keep track of deliveries. It helps you look busy. He took the invoice from her hand and folded it once. Jobs like this are not hard to lose, Annie. Remember that before you start talking about things above your pay grade. He turned away before she could answer. Pans moved. Water ran. Someone called for parsley. The dishwasher started stacking plates harder than necessary. Everyone returned to work because work was safer than witnessing. Annie stood still for a few seconds, staring at the place where Gerald had disappeared. Then Luis Ramirez came over from the prep table. What did you smell? He asked. She turned toward him, grateful he had not asked whether she was all right. The scallops. Luis set the knife down, pulled on gloves, and opened one of the trays. He bent close, then leaned back almost immediately. He sighed, that's not fresh. Annie nodded. Look at the label. Luis peeled back the corner. Beneath the top sticker was another one. Cheaper. Older. With a different product code. He looked at her. You showed him this? I tried. Luis let the sticker fall back into place. Keep your notes. He told me to stop. Then keep better ones. Luis glanced at the pocket of her apron. What have you written down so far? Annie pulled the notebook out and opened it to the page marked Wednesday. The truck arrived at 7:12, she said. The invoice says 5:40. Scallops smell sour. Shrimp look pale. Beef is labeled premium, but the marbling is uneven. Truffles are soft around the edges. The olive oil cap is crooked. She looked at the page, then gave Luis a small, tired smile. I tried to tell Gerald, but he brushed it off. Annie turned slightly toward him, lowering her voice. The restaurant is paying for one thing, she said, but receiving something else. And we can't fix this by ourselves, Luis said. Annie looked at him. Who's coming tonight? Luis lowered his voice. Tonight, we've got an important dinner for the owner, Nathaniel Whitmore. Luis continued. He's coming with investors. Big table. Private room. Gerald's been on everyone all week. Luis lowered his voice. If that seafood is for the VIP table, this could get ugly. It's already ugly, Annie said. No. I mean uglier than Gerald yelling. Annie let out a quiet breath. And even when we try to do our jobs right, we're still the ones who have to carry the blame. Luis looked at her for a moment. That's life, he said. People like us don't get much of a voice. After a second, she gave a small smile. Not happy, not defeated, just practical. I don't know when the bad part is coming, she said, but if I don't finish washing these greens, I'm going to have trouble with Mr. Gerald before lunch. Luis huffed once, almost a laugh, then washed the greens. Annie slid the notebook back into her apron pocket and reached for the first crate. She carried a heap of vegetables to the sink, turned on the water, and began working them loose by hand. Annie kept washing, but every few minutes, her eyes moved back to the seafood under the melting ice. The wrong label was still there. The sour smell was still there. The invoice still said premium, and Gerald Pike, wherever he was in the front of the house, had decided none of it mattered. Annie rinsed another handful of greens and set them aside. She did not know what would happen that night. She only knew the food was telling the truth, and so far, she and Luis were the only ones listening. By mid-afternoon, Annie's hands smelled like wet greens, lemon peel, and cold metal. At 3 o'clock, the kitchen shifted from prep into dinner readiness. F1 table in the private room had become the center of the building. Miss Darlene came through with a rack of clean glasses and gave Annie a look over the top of them. Darlene was in her 60s. "You eating today, baby?" she asked. "I brought something." "That's not what I asked." Annie gave her a quick smile. "Yes, ma'am. I'll eat." Darlene glanced toward the dining room. Big night. Men with money coming in. That always makes folks nervous. It makes Mr. Gerald nervous. Darlene let out a short sound. Gerald was born nervous and dressed it up as management. When Gerald walked away, Annie carried a tray of washed herbs toward Luis's station. She kept her voice low. "Chef knows something's off." Luis did not look up. Knowing and saying are two different jobs. "Did you tell him?" "I told him the scallops smell tired. He said Gerald approved the product and we're too close to service to change the course." "Tired," Annie repeated. Luis gave her a look. "That was me being polite." Annie set the herbs down. "If this goes to the VIP table and someone gets sick." "I know. No, I mean it. It won't be Gerald they blame first. It'll be whoever touched the food last." Luis's knife stopped for half a second. "Then we don't touch that tray without making noise." Before Annie could answer, Gerald's voice cut across the kitchen. "Annie, pantry, now." She went. He stood by the dry storage shelves, away from most of the staff. "Tonight is not the night for your little concerns," he said. "Mr. Whitmore has investors at 7:30. This dinner matters to the company, to this restaurant, and to every person here who understands what a job is worth." Annie kept her hands at her sides. "There is a problem with the ingredient receiving, sir. I don't think you understand what you're saying." "I think I do, because a person who understood would not create confusion over a delivery she is not qualified to judge. I only wanted someone to check it, and someone did." "Who checked it, sir?" A voice came from behind them before Gerald could answer. "How are the ingredients?" Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the pantry entrance, one hand resting lightly against the door frame. Gerald recovered quickly. His smile arrived before his breath did. "Mr. Whitmore, good evening, sir. I didn't expect you downstairs. Please, let me handle this little matter." Nathaniel did not move. "I want to hear about the ingredients." Gerald stepped half in front of Annie. "Sir, this girl does not know anything about the food being served to the people out there. She keeps saying the food costs are too high." Annie opened her mouth, but Gerald spoke over her. She saw an invoice and decided she understood purchasing. But people like her don't always understand that quality comes with a price. Nathaniel's eyes shifted to Annie. "Is that what you said?" Gerald snapped before she could answer. "You will be fired if you keep repeating the same thing over and over." Annie looked up. "I want the restaurant not to lose money." Gerald let out a laugh. "This restaurant existed before you walked through that back door, Annie. And it will exist after you leave." "Sir, please look at it," she said. "The quality keeps going down, but the purchase price keeps going up. The seafood code doesn't match the invoice. The delivery time is wrong. The beef is marked premium, but it isn't the same grade we used to get. The oil labels don't match the case codes." Gerald's smile thinned. "She is repeating kitchen gossip." "I wrote down the numbers," Annie said. "Not gossip." Gerald leaned toward Annie, his voice low again. "You are very close to becoming more trouble than you are worth." Annie's courage faltered. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. I wasn't trying to show off." Gerald exhaled through his nose. "Then be quiet and do your job." Nathaniel looked at Gerald, then at Annie. "Tonight is very important," he said. "I don't want any mistakes." Gerald seized the pause. "We're close to service, Mr. Whitmore. I'll make sure everything is handled." "See that you do," Nathaniel said. Then he turned and left the pantry. Gerald waited until Nathaniel was gone before looking back at Annie. "For the rest of the night, you stay away from the seafood station. You stay away from the VIP service line. You wash, label, carry, and keep your mouth shut. Is that clear?" Annie forced herself to speak. Yes, sir. He pointed toward the dish area. Go. Well? He said quietly. Mr. Whitmore heard part of it. Louise looked toward the dining room. And? I don't know. Then the hostess came through the kitchen door and said, Mr. Whitmore's investors are here. Every cook heard it. Every server straightened. Gerald appeared at once, smoothing his jacket, his guest smile already in place. Louise looked across the kitchen at Annie. Neither of them said a word. On the seafood station, under clean film and crushed ice, the scallops waited for the fire. If Annie's courage touched your heart, please like this video and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. And if you believe even the quietest worker can protect the truth, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. The first investors arrived with the kind of quiet that made the staff louder. Not because the guests raised their voices, but because everyone around them suddenly tried too hard not to make a mistake. Silverware was adjusted half an inch. Water glasses were filled before anyone asked. Servers spoke in careful tones near the private room, then hurried back through the swinging door with tight faces and quick hands. Annie kept to the prep sink because Gerald had told her to. She peeled labels from one container and replaced them with fresh ones, writing dates in block letters so no one could say they could not read her hand. She could see the seafood station from where she stood. Luis was there, working slower than usual, not because he was careless, but because every movement had become a decision. Chef Nolan stood at the pass, reading the printed menu, as if the words might change. First course, cornmeal madeleines with whipped honey butter. Second, chilled crab salad with citrus. Third, seared dayboat scallops over sweet corn puree. That was the one. Annie had heard it called out twice already. The scallops were not just part of the menu. They were the course Gerald wanted everyone to remember. At 7:20, Nathaniel Whitmore entered the private dining room with 6 investors. Annie did not see them directly, but she knew from the way the servers straightened, the way Gerald's voice softened, the way the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. One server came back whispering that 2 men were from New York, 1 woman from Atlanta, and another man wore a watch that probably cost more than the walk-in cooler. Focus, Chef Nolan said, though nobody had spoken to him. Gerald came through the kitchen doors with his guest smile still attached to his face. We are on schedule. No improvising, no second-guessing, no interruptions. His eyes landed on Annie for 1 second. She looked down at the labels. The first course went out clean, then the wine, then salads. For a while, the kitchen returned to the rhythm it knew. Plates down, garnish placed, sauce wiped, server called, door swung open, door swung closed. Annie almost let herself believe the seafood might be stopped quietly. Maybe Chef Nolan would smell it again. Maybe Luis would refuse to cook it. Maybe Nathaniel had heard enough in the pantry to order someone else to check. But hope, she had learned, could become an excuse if you used it to avoid doing what you already knew was right. Luis lifted 1 tray of scallops from the ice. He brought it close to the station light and looked at it. Annie watched his face. He did not like what he saw. Chef Nolan stepped beside him. We need 8 plates in 4 minutes. Luis kept his voice low. Chef, these still smell off. Chef Nolan's jaw moved. Trim what you need to. Hard sear, lemon butter, keep it moving. You want me to cook bad scallops harder? Chef looked toward Gerald, who stood near the pass watching everything. I want you to do the menu. Gerald came over. Problem? No, Chef Nolan said too quickly. Luis did not answer. Gerald turned to him. Then why are we standing still? Luis set the tray down. I'm saying we should switch the course. Gerald's smile disappeared. You are not saying anything. You are cooking. Annie's hand stopped over the label she was writing. The marker left a dark dot where it touched the container lid too long. Gerald pointed toward the pan. Fire them. Luis looked once at Annie. It was not a request. It was not permission. It was simply a look from one person who knew the truth to another. Then he put the first scallops into the pan. The sound was sharp, the kind of sizzle that usually made a kitchen feel alive. Tonight it made Annie's stomach turn. Butter went in, then thyme, then garlic. The smell rose, rich at first, then wrong underneath. The lemon helped hide it. Heat helped hide it. A good sauce could hide many sins long enough for a plate to cross a dining room. Annie wiped her hands on a towel and moved toward Luis's station. Gerald saw her immediately. Back to the sink. I need to get more labels. No, you don't. A server arrived at the pass. VIP scallops ready? 30 seconds, Chef Nolan said. Luis plated with tight hands. Corn puree, scallops, greens, sauce, shaved truffle. Annie noticed the truffle pieces were too dark at the edges. She noticed everything now. The plates looked beautiful. That was the worst part. They looked exactly like something people would trust. Gerald stepped close to the pass, inspecting each plate. Good. Send them. The server lifted the first 2 plates. Annie felt her heartbeat in her throat. She thought of the pantry. Nathaniel's words, "I don't want any mistakes." Gerald had taken that sentence and folded it into his own protection, but Annie had heard it differently. If the owner did not want mistakes, then somebody had to stop the biggest one from leaving the kitchen. The server turned toward the dining room. Annie moved. She did not plan it as a brave thing. There was no speech in her head, no picture of anyone thanking her. She simply crossed the space between the prep sink and the pass before fear could catch up. "Don't serve that plate," she said. The words came out clear enough to stop the server. Gerald turned slowly. "Annie." She stepped closer, blocking the server's path without touching him. "Please, don't take that out." The kitchen went still. This time nobody pretended not to hear. Chef Nolan looked like a man watching a bridge collapse under his own feet. Luis set down his towel. The server froze with a plate in each hand, eyes darting between Gerald and Annie. Gerald's voice dropped. "Move. I can't. You can, and you will. The seafood isn't safe." The private dining room door was only a few steps away. From beyond it came the low sound of conversation. Silverware. A woman laughing politely. Then the laughter faded. Annie realized her voice had carried farther than she intended. Gerald smiled, but it had no warmth. This employee is confused. The swinging door opened, and Nathaniel Whitmore appeared at the threshold of the kitchen. Behind him, Annie could see part of the private room. White tablecloth. Wine glasses. Investors turned in their chairs. The whole evening seemed to lean toward her. Nathaniel looked at the server holding the plates, then at Annie. "What is going on?" Gerald moved first. "Mr. Whitmore, I apologize. This is a staff discipline issue." Annie was told to stay away from the VIP line. Annie felt every eye in the room land on her. She could hear Gerald building the story already. Young worker, bad attitude, disobeyed instructions, embarrassed the restaurant. He was good at that. Men like Gerald did not only manage restaurants, they managed versions of events. Nathaniel's face gave away nothing. "Is the food unsafe?" Gerald answered before Annie could. "No, sir, absolutely not. She has been making uninformed comments about pricing all day. She does not understand imported seafood, supply costs, or kitchen standards." Annie looked at the plate. The scallops sat in a pool of butter sauce, browned and perfect from the outside. "I understand the label didn't match the crate," she said. Gerald cut in. "She washes greens. I understand the truck came 90 minutes later than the invoice says. She is not authorized to review invoices. I understand my name was signed on a receiving slip I didn't sign." That quieted the room differently. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened. "What did you say?" Gerald's jaw tightened. "This is getting ridiculous." Annie reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the notebook. Her hands trembled, but not enough to stop her. She opened to Wednesday. "I wrote it down when the truck came in. 7:12. The invoice says 5:40. The scallop crate had one label over another. The supplier code under the sticker was different. The smell was sour before they were cooked. I told Mr. Pike. I told Chef. Luis checked it too." Nathaniel looked at Luis. "Is that true?" Luis did not look at Gerald. "Yes, sir." Chef Nolan closed his eyes briefly. Gerald stepped forward. "With respect, Mr. Whitmore, kitchens have odors. Young employees get nervous. This is not the place to debate." Nathaniel raised one hand, and Gerald stopped. Annie had never seen a room obey silence so quickly. Nathaniel turned to the server. "Set the plates down." The server did. Nathaniel looked back at Annie. "Show me the label." Gerald's face changed. Just a little. Annie saw it because she had spent the day watching him. It was the first time he looked less angry than afraid. Annie walked to the seafood crate under the station. Luis moved aside so she could reach it. She lifted the top label with her fingernail, careful not to tear it, and showed the cheaper code beneath. Nathaniel leaned in. The kitchen stayed silent behind him. Annie said, The restaurant paid for one thing, sir, but this is something else. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nathaniel straightened and looked at Gerald. Open the invoices, he said. Gerald swallowed. Sir, the investors are waiting. Nathaniel's voice stayed calm. Then they can wait for the truth. Gerald did not move at first. His hand stayed on the edge of the pass. Fingers pressed against the stainless steel hard enough to whiten at the knuckles. The plates of scallops sat between him and Nathaniel Whitmore, still warm, still arranged beautifully, still smelling faintly wrong beneath the lemon butter. Sir, Gerald said, with respect, opening purchasing files in the middle of service is not the best way to handle this. Nathaniel looked at him. I didn't ask for the best way to protect the mood. I asked for the invoices. The words were not loud, but the kitchen understood them. So did Gerald. He nodded once, too quickly, then turned toward the office near the back hall. Of course. No, Nathaniel said. You'll stay here. Someone else will get them. That was when Gerald's face changed again. Just a small break in the surface, like a crack in glaze. Nathaniel turned to Chef Nolan. Where are the receiving records kept? Chef Nolan cleared his throat. Office cabinet, lower drawer. This week's invoices are clipped by date. Gerald's voice sharpened. Chef, I can handle. Nathaniel did not look away from Chef. Send someone. Chef Nolan glanced around the kitchen and landed on Luis. Luis, get them. Luis wiped his hands and started toward the office. Gerald took half a step as if to follow him, then stopped when Nathaniel's eyes moved back to him. Annie stood near the seafood crate with the peeled-back label still lifted in one hand. She did not know where to put herself. She was the reason the room had stopped, but she was still the lowest person in it. That was a strange kind of visibility. Everyone could see her, but no one knew whether to treat her like an employee, a witness, or a problem. The private dining room door opened wider. A woman in a cream blazer appeared behind Nathaniel. She looked to be in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and the calm posture of someone used to boardrooms. Nathaniel, she said, is there an issue? He turned slightly. Possible receiving problem. Gerald stepped in before Annie could breathe. A misunderstanding, Miss Voss. One of our kitchen helpers became concerned about a label. We're resolving it. The woman's eyes moved to Annie, then the scallop plates, then the crate. She did not seem like someone who accepted the word misunderstanding without checking what it covered. Nathaniel said, please tell the others there will be a short delay. Miss Voss looked at him for 1 second longer. Should they be concerned? Not if we handle it correctly. She nodded and went back inside. Gerald lowered his voice. Sir, I must advise that this kind of delay, in front of investors, may create a confidence issue. Nathaniel's gaze stayed steady. Serving questionable food would create a larger one. Luis returned with a folder and a stack of clipped invoices. He handed them directly to Nathaniel, not Gerald. Annie noticed that. Gerald noticed too. Nathaniel set the papers on the prep counter. Miss Carter, Annie blinked. It took half a second to understand he meant her. No one in that kitchen had called her that before. Yes, sir? Show me what you saw. Gerald laughed under his breath. Mr. Whitmore, are we really letting an 18-year-old receiving helper audit supplier documents during VIP service? Nathaniel opened the folder. I'm letting the person who stopped the plate explain why she stopped it. Annie stepped closer to the counter. Her fingers were still cold, but her voice steadied when she looked at the papers. The fear was still there. It had not gone anywhere. But numbers helped. Labels helped. Facts had edges she could hold. This one, she said, pointing to the invoice. Scallops. It says Harbor Crown Premium Day, Boat, code HCPD19. But the label underneath says HCMR04. That's not the same item. What does Mr. mean? Nathaniel asked. I don't know for sure, but it's been on cheaper boxes before. Bulk frozen, not fresh day. Boat. Gerald crossed his arms. She is guessing. Louise spoke from behind Annie. No, she's not. I've seen the same code on frozen product. Chef Nolan did not speak, but he looked at the floor, which said enough. Annie turned another page. This says delivery at 5:40 a.m. I was here at 5:30. The truck came at 7:12. I wrote it down. Gerald said, delivery times are often entered from dispatch estimates. Then why is there a receiving signature at 5:47? Annie asked. That stopped him for a beat. Nathaniel looked down at the signature line. Whose name is this? Annie swallowed. Mine. Did you sign it? No, sir. Gerald moved in fast. The staff signs for one another all the time when deliveries are busy. It's informal, but not unusual. Annie looked at him. My last name is Carter. That says Carter. Luis made a quiet sound, not quite a laugh, not quite anger. Nathaniel read the signature again. His jaw set. Annie turned the page before Gerald could fill the silence. The beef invoice says premium dry, aged ribeye. Price almost doubled from last month. But the boxes today don't have the aging date. And the marbling is wrong. Maybe it's still usable, but it is not what the restaurant paid for. You are not a butcher, Gerald said. No, Annie said, but I can read a label. The kitchen heard that. A few people looked up. Gerald's face flushed. Careful. Nathaniel looked at him. Don't threaten her. Gerald opened his mouth, then closed it. Annie did not enjoy that. She thought she might, but she didn't. It only made the room feel more dangerous. Men like Gerald did not forget embarrassment. They stored it. Nathaniel turned another invoice himself. Truffles. Annie nodded, soft at the edges. Some were dark. They came in a container without the usual import sticker. The invoice charged the highest price I've seen. Olive oil? Crooked seal. Case code doesn't match the bottle code. I wrote that down too. Nathaniel looked at her notebook. May I see it? Annie hesitated. It was not an official document. It had grocery lists on one page, bus times on another, notes from Evelyn's doctor near the back, and delivery records written between all of it. It was personal in the way poor people's things often had to be personal and practical at the same time, but she handed it to him. He opened it carefully. That surprised her. He did not flip through it like trash. He read the page she had marked, then the page before, then another. His expression did not soften, but it changed. How long have you been keeping these notes? Since I started, sir. Why? Annie looked toward Gerald, then back at Nathaniel. Because people forget what happens at the back door. The kitchen went still again, but this time the silence did not feel like fear only. It felt like something had been named. Nathaniel closed the notebook and handed it back. Chef Nolan. Yes, sir? Pull every item from this delivery. Nothing from that supplier goes out tonight until it's inspected. Chef Nolan nodded. Yes, sir. Gerald stepped forward. Sir, the menu. Change it. The investors came for the tasting menu. They came to decide whether to trust this company, Nathaniel said. I won't earn that trust by feeding them something my own staff warned me about. Gerald's mouth tightened around the word staff, as if Annie had no right to be included in it. Nathaniel turned to Luis. Can you build a replacement course? Luis looked at Chef Nolan. Chef gave a small nod, tired but real. Yes, sir, Luis said. Local shrimp from yesterday's inspected batch, if we keep it simple. Grits, tomato broth, herbs. It won't be the printed menu. Will it be safe? Yes, sir. Then make that. The kitchen moved all at once. Chef Nolan started calling changes. Luis pulled clean pans. Servers exchanged worried looks but adjusted. The scallop plates were removed from the pass and set aside like evidence no one had yet named. Gerald stood very still. Annie thought the worst might be over for the night. Then Nathaniel turned back to the invoices and asked the question that made Gerald's eyes go flat. How many months have the costs been rising like this? Gerald answered too fast. Imported goods have been volatile. I asked how many months. Several, Gerald said. Annie heard herself speak before she could stop. 7. Everyone looked at her. She held the notebook tighter. At least 7, sir. That's when the code started changing more often. Gerald said her name once, low and warning. Annie. Nathaniel looked at Gerald, then at the old notebook in Annie's hand. After dinner, he said, we're going through the records. Gerald's smile returned, thin and empty. Of course, sir. But Annie saw his hand move toward his phone. A minute later, as the kitchen scrambled to rebuild the course, Gerald stepped into the back hall and made a call with his voice too low to hear. Annie watched him through the narrow window in the swinging door. Luis came beside her with a pan in one hand. What is it? She did not look away from Gerald. I think he's warning someone, she said. Luis followed her gaze. In the private dining room, the investors waited. In the kitchen, the bad scallops cooled on the counter. And somewhere on the other end of Gerald Pike's phone, Annie understood. There was someone who already knew what those invoices were hiding. Gerald came back from the hallway with his phone already in his pocket and his face arranged into calm. That was what bothered Annie most. Not the call itself, not even the way he had turned his shoulder so nobody could read his mouth. It was how quickly he returned to the kitchen wearing control again, as if nothing had cracked, as if the bad labels, the false signature, and Nathaniel Whitmore's order to inspect the records were all small inconveniences that could be polished away before dessert. Louise kept his eyes on the pan. "Shrimp's going out in 2 minutes," he said to Chef Nolan. Chef nodded, though his face looked older than it had an hour ago. "Keep it clean, no fancy tricks. Let the broth carry it." Annie stayed near the prep sink, where Gerald had told her to stay, but no one had told her not to watch. She saw the replacement course come together. Local shrimp from yesterday's inspected batch, stone, ground grits, tomato broth, a little charred corn, herbs. She had washed herself. It was simpler than the printed tasting menu, but it smelled right. That mattered more than beauty now. The servers carried the plates out with careful hands. Gerald followed them through the swinging door, smiling as if the change had been planned all along. A minute later, Miss Voss stepped into the kitchen. The woman in the cream blazer did not look angry. She looked attentive, which somehow put everyone more on edge. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to tell you the replacement course is acceptable," she said. "He also asked that the removed seafood be held untouched." Chef Nolan nodded. "Already set aside." Miss Voss's eyes moved to Annie. "You're the one who raised the concern?" Annie wiped her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am. What's your position here?" Gerald was not in the room, but Annie could still hear him answering for her. "Kitchen, helper, receiving support, girl." She chose the plainest truth. "I receive deliveries, wash produce, label containers, and help where they tell me." Miss Voss looked toward the seafood crates. "And you noticed the mismatch?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She turned to Chef. "Mr. Whitmore wants the receiving logs, supplier invoices, and delivery slips ready after dinner. Nothing leaves the building." Then she went back out. Louise leaned close enough that only Annie could hear. "That woman doesn't miss much." "Who is she?" "Margaret Voss. Investor. Old money, sharp teeth. If she's asking questions, this isn't staying small." Annie looked toward the office hall. It was never small. For the next hour, the restaurant performed dinner while the kitchen carried a second, quieter service underneath it. Courses went out. Wine was poured. Gerald moved between the private room and the kitchen, smiling in one place, tightening his jaw in the other. Every time he passed Annie, he did not speak. That was worse than yelling. It meant he was waiting. At 8:40, the dessert course left the kitchen. Pecan tartlets with bourbon cream, sea salt, and candied orange. Annie watched the plates go out and realized her shoulders hurt from holding herself still. Chef Nolan looked around the kitchen. "Clean down, but don't break anything down from receiving. Mr. Whitmore wants records." Gerald entered just as Chef finished speaking. "I'll handle the records." Chef's face tightened. Mr. Whitmore said, "I heard what he said." Gerald smiled, but no one smiled back. "And as manager, I'll make sure the documents are presented properly." Annie saw Louise stop wiping his station. Presented properly. That sounded too close to changed. Gerald turned toward Annie. "You can clock out." Annie blinked. "My shift isn't over." "It is now." Louise set down his towel. "She's on closing prep. I said she can clock out." Annie understood the move immediately. If she left, Gerald could pull the records, arrange them, lose what needed losing. And by morning, the story would be different. She would become the girl who made a scene, went home, and could not prove what she had said. "I still have labeling to finish," Annie said. "I'll assign someone else." Before Gerald could say more, Nathaniel entered through the kitchen door with Margaret Voss beside him and 2 other investors behind them. The room changed around him. People stepped back without being asked. Nathaniel looked first at Gerald, then at Annie. No one involved in tonight's receiving issue is leaving yet. Gerald's smile returned late. "Of course, sir. I was only trying to reduce crowding in the kitchen. There's enough room for the truth," Nathaniel said. Nobody answered that. He turned to Chef Nolan. "Where can we review the records?" Chef pointed toward the small office. "It's cramped, sir." "It'll do." Gerald moved quickly. "I'll bring everything in." Nathaniel shook his head. Miss Carter will show us where the records are. For a second, Annie thought she had misheard him. Gerald did not. Sir, she doesn't have access to full purchasing files. She found the problem without full access. Nathaniel's voice stayed even. Let's see what she can find with it. The small office behind the kitchen was barely large enough for a desk, 2 filing cabinets, a printer, and a chair with torn vinyl at one corner. A calendar from a seafood distributor hung on the wall, still turned to the wrong month. Gerald stood near the doorway, too close, until Margaret Voss looked at him and said, "Mr. Pike, give the girl room." Annie opened the lower drawer Chef had mentioned and pulled the folder for the current week. Then she pulled the previous week. Then the month before. The files were clipped by date, but not neatly. Some invoices had delivery slips attached, others did not. A few had handwritten initials instead of signatures. Nathaniel stood beside the desk, sleeves still buttoned, watching her sort. Annie laid the papers into 3 stacks. Supplier invoice, delivery slip, receiving signature. Gerald gave a small laugh. This is not an elementary school project. Annie kept working. Margaret Voss looked at the stacks. Why those 3? Annie answered without looking up. Because if the supplier invoice says one thing, the delivery slip says another, and the signature says somebody accepted it anyway. That's where the lie has to pass through. The office went quiet. Nathaniel leaned closer. Say that again. Annie looked up. A bad shipment doesn't become official until someone signs for it. If the food is wrong, and the paperwork still says it's right, the signature is the doorway. Luis, standing just outside the office, murmured, "Back door tells the truth." Annie almost looked at him, but she kept her focus on the records. She found the first mismatch in under 5 minutes. Scallops invoiced as premium day boat, delivered under a cheaper code. Signature, Annie Carter, not Carter. She set it aside. Then another, beef charged as dry-aged prime, delivery slip missing the aging date. Signature, unreadable. Then another, truffle container billed by imported weight, but the delivery slip listed domestic specialty mushrooms. Gerald's initials appeared at the bottom. Gerald said, "Minor clerical issues. Common in high-volume operations." Annie pulled out her notebook and opened it beside the invoices. Not when they repeat every week. Nathaniel's eyes moved from the notebook to the papers. How far back does it go? Annie checked the folder tabs. At least 7 months from what I saw. Maybe longer if the older files match. Gerald stepped forward. This is irresponsible. She is making accusations with no training, no authority, and no understanding of supplier volatility. Margaret Voss picked up one invoice. Then explain why the receiving signature is misspelled. Gerald turned to her. Staff sign quickly. Mistakes happen, Annie said. Not with my name. I don't sign my name wrong. Nathaniel looked at Gerald. Did you authorize anyone to sign for her? No, sir. Did you know staff signatures were being used this way? No, sir. Annie pulled another slip free from the stack. Her chest tightened when she saw it. This one was not her name. It was Luis Ramirez. But the signature was wrong. Too round. Too careful. She held it up. He stepped into the doorway. That's not mine. Gerald's voice rose. Enough. Nathaniel turned his head slowly. Careful, Gerald. The manager lowered his voice, but anger had already broken through. Sir, with respect, this is becoming a circus. We have investors in the building, a kitchen trying to close, and a teenager with a notebook turning ordinary paperwork issues into fraud. Annie felt that word land before anyone else reacted. Fraud. Gerald had said it first, trying to make it sound ridiculous. But once spoken, it stayed in the room. Nathaniel repeated it quietly. Fraud. Gerald went still. Margaret Voss set down the invoice. That is what this begins to look like. Gerald forced a laugh. No, it looks like a restaurant under pressure with imperfect paperwork. Annie kept sorting. Her fingers found a paper clipped behind a wine invoice. It did not belong there. It was a supplier credit memo from Harbor Crown Imports, but the payee line listed another company, Pike Hospitality Consulting, LLC. She stared at the name. Louise saw her face. Annie? She handed the paper to Nathaniel. He read it once, then again. Gerald moved toward him. That's unrelated. Nathaniel did not give it to him. This is your company? Gerald's mouth opened, then closed. Margaret Voss looked over Nathaniel's shoulder. Why would a supplier issue a credit to the restaurant manager's private consulting company? No one spoke. Outside the office, the kitchen had gone quiet enough for Annie to hear a glass being set down somewhere near the bar. Gerald reached for the paper. Nathaniel moved it out of his reach. Don't, Nathaniel said. It was one word, but it carried the weight of ownership, anger, and betrayal. Gerald's face lost its polish. Annie looked at the stacks of invoices on the desk, then at the credit memo in Nathaniel's hand. The room felt smaller than it had before, but the truth felt larger. It had entered through mislabeled seafood, passed through forged signatures, and now sat under Gerald Pike's own company name. Nathaniel folded the credit memo once and placed it on top of the stack. Lock the office, he said. Call legal. And no one from Harbor Crown gets a warning from this building. Annie looked toward the hallway where Gerald had made his call earlier. Nathaniel saw her look. What is it? She hesitated. Louise said, Tell him. Annie met Nathaniel's eyes. Mr. Pike already called someone after you ordered the records opened. Nathaniel turned to Gerald. For the first time all night, Gerald had no smile ready. Nathaniel kept his eyes on Gerald long enough for everyone in the office to understand the question did not need to be spoken twice. Who did you call? He asked. Gerald's hands settled at his sides. A supplier contact. Name. Vivian Cross. Margaret Voss let out a small breath through her nose. Harbor Crown. Gerald looked at her. I was trying to prevent confusion. If there are discrepancies in their paperwork, they need to be aware. Nathaniel picked up the credit memo again. You called the supplier after I ordered records preserved, and now we've found a payment document from that supplier tied to your private company. It is not a payment, It is not a payment document, Gerald said quickly. It's a credit memo. To Pike Hospitality Consulting LLC. That entity has done advisory work. For my supplier? Gerald's face tightened. Independent consulting is not illegal. No, Nathaniel said, but taking money from a supplier while approving inflated invoices for my restaurant may be. The small office felt too warm. Annie stood close to the filing cabinet, trying to make herself smaller without disappearing. She had wanted someone to check the seafood. She had not imagined standing in a back office, while a billionaire questioned his manager about possible fraud. Louis stayed near the doorway. Chef Nolan stood behind him, silent, his arms folded across his stained chef coat. A few kitchen workers had gathered farther down the hall, pretending to clean things that did not need cleaning. Gerald looked past Nathaniel, past Margaret, and straight at Annie. This is what happens when untrained employees start interpreting documents they don't understand. Annie felt the old reflex rise. Apologize. Step back, smooth it over. She had learned that reflex in school hallways, at bus stops, in offices where adults called girls like her strong, when they meant difficult. But Luis was watching, Nathaniel was watching, and the credit memo was still in Nathaniel's hand. I didn't create the document, she said. I found where it didn't belong. Gerald gave her a hard smile. You were told to stay out of purchasing, and you were paid by a supplier, she said. The word surprised even her. They landed clean. Gerald stepped forward. Luis moved 1 foot into the office. Nathaniel spoke first. Gerald. The manager stopped. Nathaniel turned to Margaret. Call our general counsel. Now. Tell them we need an immediate preservation notice for all records connected to Harbor Crown Imports, Pike Hospitality Consulting, and Marrow and Tides purchasing files. Margaret already had her phone out. On it. Gerald shook his head. You are escalating based on scraps. No, Nathaniel said. I am responding based on risk. There's a difference. Chef Nolan cleared his throat. What do you want done with the kitchen, sir? Finish service without anything from tonight's disputed delivery. After that, close receiving. No one touches these files except legal. Miss Carter, Mr. Ramirez, you, and me. Gerald's voice sharpened. Miss Carter? Nathaniel looked at him. Yes. She is an 18-year-old helper. She is also the only person who brought me accurate information before bad food reached my table. That silenced the hall. Annie looked down at the notebook in her hand. She was grateful, but gratitude did not make her less afraid. Gerald still had power. Men like him did not lose it all at once. They shifted, denied, blamed, and waited for the room to get tired. Margaret returned from the corner of the office, phone still to her ear. Counsel is joining by video in 10 minutes. They said preserve everything. Do not confront the supplier further. Do not delete messages. Do not allow documents to leave. Nathaniel nodded. Good, Gerald said. I'm going to step outside. No, Nathaniel said. I need air. You'll get it after counsel speaks with you. Gerald laughed once. Am I being detained? Nathaniel's tone did not change. You are being asked not to leave a workplace during an internal review involving records you approved. And if I refuse? Margaret lowered her phone. Then it will be noted. Gerald looked around the office, calculating. Annie saw it. The exits, the faces, the odds. Then he smoothed his jacket. Fine. For the next 10 minutes, nobody said much. The kitchen kept working, but the heart of it had changed. The sound of plates and pans carried from the line. Yet the office sat in a separate pressure. Nathaniel read through invoice after invoice. Annie helped him match delivery codes to her notes. Luis confirmed what he recognized from the station. Chef Nolan confirmed which items had been used and which had not. One pattern became two became 6. By the time Margaret set a tablet on the desk and the general counsel appeared on screen, Annie had laid out 3 months of mismatched seafood records and 4 false receiving signatures. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Haynes. She looked to be in her 50s, with reading glasses low on her nose and the direct voice of someone who charged by the minute and wasted none of them. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Summarize. Nathaniel did. Questionable seafood, mismatched codes, forged receiving signatures, supplier credit to manager's private company, possible prior call to supplier after preservation became necessary. Rebecca listened without moving. Then she said, Mr. Pike, do not contact Harbor Crown again. Do not access company email except under supervision. Do not remove documents from the premises. Do not delete anything from your phone. Do you understand? Gerald's face went flat. I understand what you're saying. That is not what I asked. A beat passed. I understand. Rebecca turned to Annie through the screen. Your name? Annie Carter. Position? Annie hesitated. Receiving support. Prep assistant. Did you keep contemporaneous notes? Annie did not know the word. But she understood enough. I wrote things down when they happened. That may matter. Do not alter them. Do not rewrite them. Do not tear anything out. Keep the notebook as it is. Yes, ma'am. Gerald scoffed. We're treating a teenager's notebook as evidence now? Rebecca looked at him over her glasses. If a teenager's notebook is more accurate than your receiving file, Mr. Pike, that is not her problem. Luis looked down, but Annie saw his mouth twitch. Nathaniel did not smile. Rebecca continued, Mr. Whitmore, you need to suspend Mr. Pike's access pending review. Gerald straightened. That is outrageous. Nathaniel looked at him. Your keys and access card. After 12 years? No. Gerald's anger showed then, no longer hidden by polish. You're making a mistake because a kitchen girl smelled scallops. Annie flinched, but only inside. Nathaniel held out his hand. Keys. For a moment, Annie thought Gerald might refuse. Then he pulled the key ring from his belt and placed it in Nathaniel's palm. The access card followed. Margaret said, I'll have security escort him to collect personal items. Gerald turned to Annie one last time. His voice was low enough that only those nearby heard it. This will not end the way you think. Annie met his eyes, though every part of her wanted to look away. I only wanted you to check the food. That's your problem, he said. You still think this is about food. Security arrived 2 minutes later. Gerald walked out without hurrying, shoulders squared, the way men left rooms when they wanted everyone to believe they had chosen to go. The moment he disappeared down the hall, the kitchen seemed to exhale, but Annie did not. Not yet. Nathaniel set Gerald's keys on the desk and looked at the stacks of invoices. Miss Carter, how many more folders are there? Annie opened the lower drawer. 7 months in this cabinet. Older files might be upstairs or archived. Can you keep sorting? Yes, sir. Luis stepped closer. I'll help. Chef Nolan nodded. Me too. Nathaniel looked toward the dining room, where his investors were still being served a dinner that had turned into something far larger than a meal. Then he looked back at Annie. You were right to stop that plate, he said. Annie did not know what to do with the sentence. No one in authority had ever given her words like that without attaching a warning, so she nodded once. Thank you, sir. Rebecca's voice came from the tablet. Don't thank anyone yet. Find the pattern first. Gratitude can wait. Annie pulled the next folder from the drawer and opened it on the desk. The paper smelled faintly of ink, cold storage, and something older. The habit of people believing no one at the back door would ever read carefully enough to catch them. She picked up her pencil. Outside, the last dessert plates returned from the private room. Inside the office, Annie Carter began turning one bad shipment into 7 months of truth. By 9:30, the private dinner was over, but nobody in the back office moved like the night was finished. Servers cleared wine glasses from the private room. The dish pit rattled with dessert plates. Out front, guests thanked Nathaniel Whitmore for a memorable meal, not knowing how close that meal had come to becoming a headline for all the wrong reasons. In the office, Annie sorted invoices into piles while Louise read delivery slips beside her. Chef Nolan stood at the door with a legal pad, writing down which ingredients had been used in the past month and which dishes they had gone into. Margaret Voss stayed near the printer, on and off the phone with Rebecca Haynes, the company lawyer, who wanted scans of everything before midnight. Nathaniel had taken off his suit jacket and rolled his sleeves once. That detail stayed with Annie. It did not make him one of them, not exactly. A man could roll his sleeves and still own the building, but it meant he had stopped pretending this was just an inconvenience. This one, Annie said, sliding an invoice toward Louise. Lobster tail. Billed as fresh Maine select. The delivery code says frozen bulk. Louise checked the slip. Same week we ran lobster risotto. Chef Nolan rubbed a hand over his face. That was the Valentine's menu. Nathaniel looked up. How many covers? 216 that night. Margaret typed something into her phone. Potential customer exposure? Chef Nolan shook his head. No complaints. Frozen doesn't mean unsafe by itself. But if we charged and advertised fresh Maine select, that's a problem. It is a problem, Nathaniel said. Annie kept working. The pattern was no longer hiding. It had been there for months, folded into normal paperwork, protected by busyness and trust. Harbor Crown Imports, billed premium. Marrow and Tide received cheaper goods. Gerald approved the invoices. The signatures were rushed, wrong, or attached to people who had not been there. Every small lie leaned on another until it became a system. Louise pulled a stack from March. Annie. She looked over. He held up 3 slips. Your name again. She took them. Annie Carter. A. Carter with a loop that looked nothing like hers. Once just Annie, as if her last name did not matter at all. Her throat tightened. I wasn't even on shift for this one. Nathaniel extended his hand. May I see? She gave it to him. He read the date, then looked at Chef Nolan. Can we verify schedules? Chef nodded. Payroll system. Darlene keeps printed schedules too. Gerald hated that, but she kept them. Get them. Chef left. Margaret glanced at Annie. Why would Miss Darlene keep paper schedules? Annie answered before thinking. Because computers are easy to blame. Margaret looked at her for a moment, then nodded like that made more sense than anything else she had heard all night. Louise kept digging. Here's one with my name. I was at my nephew's graduation that day. Nathaniel's mouth tightened, so this wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. From the hallway, Miss Darlene's voice carried before she appeared. Of course it was deliberate. Folks don't misspell the same names by accident for 7 months. She came into the office with a folder tucked under one arm and her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Chef Nolan followed behind her. Darlene handed the folder to Nathaniel. Schedules back to January. I keep copies because I've had managers forget promises after payday. Nathaniel accepted the folder carefully. Thank you, ma'am. The ma'am made Darlene pause. Not because she was impressed by manners, but because older women who had worked service jobs long enough knew when manners were real and when they were decoration. You're welcome, she said. Then she looked at Annie. You holding up? Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Darlene did not believe her, but she did not embarrass her by saying so. They matched the first forged signature to a schedule. Annie had not been working. The second, Louise was off. The third belonged to a dishwasher named Marcus, who had left 2 months ago. The fourth used Chef Nolan's initials on a day he was in Colombia visiting his sister after surgery. The room shifted with each match. The fraud was no longer a suspicion built on smell and labels. It had dates, It had names. It had absences. Rebecca's voice came through the tablet. Scan the schedule matches with the invoices. Mark each discrepancy. Do not make conclusions on the documents themselves. Use sticky notes. Annie reached for a stack of yellow notes in the desk drawer. Gerald's desk drawer. The thought made her hand pause. For months, maybe longer, he had sat in this chair and trusted that the people at the back of the house would be too tired, too scared, or too invisible to connect the papers. She started writing. Signature mismatch. Employee not on shift. Product code mismatch. Billed premium. Delivered frozen bulk. Receiving time impossible. Employee not clocked in. Payment to Pike Hospitality Consulting. The last one still sat on top of Nathaniel's stack like a live coal. At 10:15, Margaret stepped into the hall to take another call. When she returned, her expression had changed. Nathaniel, she said, we may have a larger problem. He looked up. One of the investors checked with a contact at the Charleston Food Journal. A critic ate here last week. Review is scheduled for Friday. Chef Nolan closed his eyes. Lord, Margaret continued. The review apparently mentions inconsistency in quality. Not food safety, but quality decline. Nathaniel stood still. Does the investor know about tonight's records? He knows something is being reviewed. He doesn't know details. Luis muttered, he will. Annie looked down at the invoices. Her first thought was not about Nathaniel's money or the investors. It was about all the people whose names were on the schedule. Miss Darlene. Marcus. The dish crew. Servers who had children. Prep cooks who worked doubles. If the restaurant went down, Gerald would not be the only person hurt. People at the bottom always felt the fall first. Nathaniel looked at Rebecca on the tablet. What is our exposure if this goes public before we complete the review? Rebecca's answer came fast. Financial, reputational, possibly regulatory, if unsafe food was served. The stronger your internal documentation, the better your position. The worst thing you can do is appear to hide it. Annie heard that and thought of the scallop plate stopped at the pass. Nathaniel turned toward her. Miss Carter, the notebook. Does it cover last week? Yes, sir. The night the critic came in? I don't know which night that was. Margaret checked her phone. Thursday. Annie flipped through the notebook. Thursday. She found the page. We had sea bass that night. I wrote that the fish was acceptable, but the truffles were soft again. And the olive oil case code didn't match. Chef Nolan leaned in. That was the truffle butter course. Luis said, we used it because the smell was masked once it was whipped. Chef looked at him. I know. That answer carried shame. Annie did not judge him. In kitchens, people made compromises under pressure and told themselves they were small. Trim that piece. Cook this longer. Use the sauce. Trust the manager. Get through service. Small compromises had a way of stacking up until someone could no longer see over them. Nathaniel put both hands on the desk. I need the truth before anyone else does. Rebecca said. Then expand the review tonight. Pull all Harbor Crown files for the last year. Gerald's office suddenly felt too small for a year of lies. Chef Nolan said. Older files are upstairs in storage. Who has access? Nathaniel asked. Chef hesitated. Gerald did. Assistant manager, maybe. Maintenance has a key. Nathaniel looked at Margaret. Get security. Annie spoke before she knew she would. There's another copy. Everyone turned to her. She felt her face warm. Not of everything, but deliveries over 5,000 get scanned for accounting. Gerald complained because the scanner jams. So sometimes they did it late, but the scanned copies should still be in the shared drive. Nathaniel said, how do you know that? I label the scan batches sometimes when the office gets behind. Margaret was already moving to the computer. Password? Annie shook her head. I don't have office login. Chef Nolan stepped forward. I do. He sat at the old computer, typed slowly, cursed once, when the first password failed, then got in on the second try. Margaret took over. Files opened by month. Harbor Crown appeared again and again. Annie stood behind them, reading file names. Open April. Then receiving. Then high value. Margaret did. The scanned invoice appeared on screen. Annie pointed. That one. Same code issue. Nathaniel leaned close. Print it. The printer groaned awake. For the next hour, the office became something between a kitchen and a courtroom. Annie called out folders. Margaret printed. Louise matched codes. Darlene checked schedules. Chef Nolan confirmed menu use. Nathaniel read every page he was handed. At 11:30, the front of the house was empty. Chairs were tucked in. The last guests were gone. Rain had begun tapping against the back windows. Annie found the oldest mismatch so far, 7 months and 6 days earlier. A seafood order billed as premium imported scallops, delivered under a frozen bulk code, approved by Gerald Pike, followed 3 days later by a supplier credit to Pike Hospitality Consulting. She placed the 2 pages side by side. Nathaniel stared at them for a long time. "That's the beginning?" he asked. Annie shook her head. "It's the first one we found." Louise leaned back against the wall. "There may be more." Nathaniel nodded once. The anger in his face had gone quiet, which made it heavier. "Then we keep going." Annie looked at the clock. Her shift had ended hours ago. Her feet hurt. Her stomach was empty except for half a biscuit. But the pattern was open now. And she knew what patterns did if left alone. They closed themselves back up around the people who made them. She pulled another folder from the stack. Outside, the rain strengthened over Charleston. Inside, Marrow and Tide, under fluorescent office light and the smell of cooling seafood, the girl Gerald had told to wash vegetables began showing a billionaire how much his trust had cost him. At midnight, Margaret Voss ordered coffee for everyone still in the building. Not the pretty kind served out front in small cups, but diner coffee in cardboard carriers from the 24-hour place 3 blocks over. A security guard brought it through the back door with a paper bag of biscuits, and for a moment the office smelled less like ink and old invoices and more like a roadside breakfast counter. Miss Darlene took 1 cup, added 2 sugars, and handed another to Annie. "Drink." Annie accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, ma'am." "You're shaking." "I'm cold." "You're tired." Annie did not argue. Darlene had raised 3 children, buried a husband, worked double shifts through 2 hurricanes, and could spot a lie from across a room. Nathaniel stood at the desk with his sleeves still rolled, studying the latest stack. The office clock clicked loud above the filing cabinet. Outside, rain ran down the small window in crooked lines. The restaurant was closed now. But Marrow and Tide had not gone quiet. It had changed into a different kind of room. One where people stopped serving and started counting damage. Rebecca Haynes remained on the tablet, her image frozen once or twice when the office Wi-Fi struggled, but her voice stayed sharp. "Let's establish buckets. Product mismatch, price inflation, forged receiving signatures, supplier payments to Pike Hospitality, and potential food quality exposure. Do not mix them. If this becomes litigation, clean categories matter." Annie looked at the desk. The papers were no longer just piles. They had become a map. "Start with product mismatch," Rebecca said. "Miss Carter, can you identify the codes consistently?" Annie nodded. "Most of them. Harbor Crown uses premium codes with PD, PR, or IM on the invoices. But the labels underneath or delivery slips show MR, BK, or FB. I think FB means frozen bulk. I'm not sure about the others." Louise leaned over a slip. "BK is bulk kitchen. I saw it on lower-cost shellfish when I worked at a hotel in Myrtle Beach." Chef Nolan added, "MR may be market remainder, not spoiled necessarily. Just not the product sold as premium." Margaret wrote that down. "So they may not have been serving unsafe food every time, but they were billing as if they delivered top grade." "Correct," Rebecca said. "Fraud does not require every item to be rotten. It requires deception." Annie turned one invoice sideways and compared it with her notebook. "This one is worse." Nathaniel looked up. "Why?" "The halibut. It was billed as line, caught Alaskan. But my note says the box came in without the insulated liner. I wrote that the fish was soft near the tail and the temperature read 44 degrees. Chef Nolan's head lifted. 44? "Yes, sir." He took the paper. "That should have been rejected. I wrote that I told Trevor." "Trevor was mourning Sue then," Louise said. "He quit in May." Chef Nolan looked down. "Or got tired of being ignored." No one answered. Nathaniel set his coffee aside. "How many temperature issues?" Annie flipped through the notebook. She had not meant for anyone to read it this closely. The pages had smudges, quick notes, small abbreviations only she used. But the facts were there. She found 1 in February, 2 in March, 1 in April, 3 in May, and the halibut in June. 7 that I wrote down, she said. Maybe more if I missed some. Rebecca's voice came from the tablet. Mark those separately. Potential safety issue. The words changed the air. Until then, some part of the room could still pretend this was mostly money. Inflated invoices, stolen margins, a manager and a supplier taking their cut. But safety issue brought faces into it. Guests celebrating anniversaries, retired couples ordering one expensive meal because they had saved for it. A church group after a funeral. People trusting that the plate in front of them had been protected by more than a smile. Nathaniel looked older in that moment. Have there been complaints? Margaret checked notes on her phone. Customer service logs may have them. We need access from corporate. I'll get it. Nathaniel took out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Annie watched him go. Earlier, she had thought of him as someone from the front of the building, someone whose world began where hers ended. But now he stood under the same dim hall light as everyone else, speaking into his phone with his jaw tight, asking for complaint records from his own company after midnight. She did not feel sorry for him. Not exactly. He owned the place. His name was on the wall, but she could see that betrayal had reached him too, just from a different door. Louise nudged a biscuit toward her. Eat. I'm not hungry. You're 18. That means you're hungry even when you're not. Darlene said. He's right. Annie took the biscuit and broke it in half. It was warm enough to soften the butter. She ate because older people in kitchens did not offer food twice unless they meant it. Margaret sat at the computer and opened a spreadsheet. We need numbers. Nathaniel will ask for numbers. Annie wiped her fingers and moved beside her. I can help. Margaret looked at her. You know Excel? A little. We used Google Sheets in school, and I helped my grandma track bills. That counts more than some MBAs I know. Annie was not sure if Margaret meant that kindly, but she sounded serious, so Annie accepted it. They built columns. Date, invoice number, product billed, product received, billed price, standard expected price, difference, signature, employee on shift, notes. Margaret typed fast. Annie read from the papers. Louise called out product codes. Chef Nolan supplied menu use. Darlene checked schedules with a ruler under each line because she said her eyes were old but not useless. By 1:15, the first estimate appeared. Margaret stared at the total. 423,000. The office went silent. That's not full year, Annie said. No, Margaret replied. That's 7 months of the files we've confirmed. Louise leaned back. Lord. Chef Nolan sat down in the torn vinyl chair like his knees had finally given up. I signed off on dishes using some of this. Nathaniel returned with his phone still in hand. Customer service is sending complaints. What's the number? Margaret turned the screen toward him. He read it. His face did not change quickly. It settled. Confirmed? Preliminary, she said. Only mismatches we can support with records. Rebecca said. Use the word preliminary. Do not use confirmed until full review. Nathaniel nodded. Preliminary theft exceeding $400,000. Gerald's absence seemed to fill the office then. 12 years of trust. 7 months of records. Maybe more. A man who had walked through the dining room smiling while the back door carried in cheaper food under premium invoices. A printer beeped. Margaret pulled the new complaint logs from the tray. She read the first one. March 18th. Couple from Savannah. Said seafood chowder tasted old. Manager comped dessert. Chef Nolan looked down. Another. April 2nd. Guest reported stomach upset after oyster special. No formal claim. Note says Gerald handled personally. Nathaniel's head lifted. Gerald handled personally? Margaret read another. May 9th. Complaint about truffle pasta tasting artificial. Gerald marked resolved. Annie felt the biscuit sit heavy in her stomach. Rebecca spoke carefully. Mr. Whitmore, if Mr. Pike intercepted complaints related to substituted or mishandled product, this widens the matter. You may have reporting obligations depending on what is found. Nathaniel looked at the complaint pages. I understand. Annie reached for her notebook and turned to March 18th. She scanned the page. That was one of the chowder days. Everyone looked at her. She kept reading. I wrote, clam soft, box wet on bottom. Louise asked about smell. Gerald said, use for chowder. Luis closed his eyes briefly. I remember that. Chef Nolan's voice was low. I should have stopped it. Nathaniel looked at him. Yes. Chef nodded once, taking it. That mattered to Annie. Not because blame fixed anything, but because she had heard too many grown people dodge plain truth until it died in the room. Nathaniel looked at Annie's notebook again. You kept all of this because nobody else would? Annie thought about that. I kept it because things didn't match. Did you tell anyone before today? Sometimes, not all of it. I tried with little things. And what happened? She looked at Chef Nolan, then at Luis, then down at the page. People were busy, or they said Gerald approved it. Chef Nolan winced, but he did not defend himself. Nathaniel stood still. That's how a company fails, he said. Not all at once. One approved shortcut at a time. Darlene sipped her coffee, and one quiet worker at a time deciding it's safer not to speak. Nathaniel looked at her. You're right. Darlene did not seem pleased to be right. At 2 a.m, Rebecca told them to stop sorting and start securing. Every document was scanned. Every physical invoice went into numbered folders. Annie's notebook was photographed page by page, not taken from her, because Rebecca said chain of custody mattered, but so did common sense. Margaret created a locked digital folder. Nathaniel sent a formal preservation notice to corporate. Security sealed Gerald's office. When they finally stepped back into the kitchen, the lights were half off. The bad scallops still sat in a marked container inside the cooler, held untouched. Annie looked at them through the glass. Louise stood beside her. You know this isn't done. I know. Gerald won't just go home and stay quiet. I know that too. Nathaniel came up behind them, not close enough to crowd. Miss Carter. Annie turned. Yes, sir? You should go home. We'll have a car take you. I take the bus. Not tonight. She wanted to say she did not need special treatment. She wanted to say she had been getting herself home from late shifts for months. But her feet hurt, her eyes burned, and Gerald's last look still sat in her mind. Yes, sir, she said. Nathaniel nodded. Be back tomorrow at 10, not 5:30. Annie hesitated. Am I still on schedule? You are now part of the review. The sentence landed strangely. Not a promotion, not praise. Something heavier. Responsibility. As she left through the back door, rain still fell over the alley. A black company car waited with its headlights on. Annie climbed in with her notebook pressed against her chest. For the first time all night, she let herself breathe. But when the car pulled away from Marrow and Tide, she looked back through the rain-streaked window and saw the kitchen light still burning. The truth had been found, but it had not yet been accepted by the world outside that building. And Annie knew, as the car turned toward North Charleston, that morning would bring people who preferred the old story, the easy story, the one where a kitchen girl had misunderstood what powerful men had already decided to hide. By the time Annie got home, it was after 3 a.m. The company car stopped in front of the small house in North Charleston, its headlights washing over the porch steps and the flower pots Evelyn refused to give up on, even when the summer heat burned half the leaves. Annie thanked the driver twice because she did not know how many times felt normal, then stepped out with her notebook held against her chest. The porch light came on before she reached the door. Evelyn Carter stood inside in her robe, one hand on the doorframe, her gray hair tied back under a scarf. She was 68, but the years had not made her soft. They had made her precise. She looked at the black car first, then at Annie's face. Come in, she said, before the neighbors decide we got rich. Annie almost laughed, but the sound broke in her throat. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner, old wood, and the chicken soup Evelyn had made 2 days ago. The television was on mute in the corner. A heating pad sat on the recliner. On the kitchen table were Evelyn's reading glasses, a pill organizer, and a mug of tea gone cold. Evelyn locked the door behind Annie. Sit down. I need to shower. You need to sit down. Annie sat. Evelyn put water in front of her, then lowered herself into the chair across from her. She did not ask 10 questions. That was one of the things Annie loved most about her. Evelyn knew when a person had been carrying too much and needed the weight named slowly. Did somebody hurt you? Evelyn asked. No. Did you lose your job? I don't think so. You don't think so? Annie looked down at the notebook. I stopped a plate from going out. Evelyn blinked once. A plate. Bad scallops. Maybe worse than bad. I told Gerald earlier, but he wouldn't listen. Then Mr. Whitmore came in, and the investors were there, and they were about to serve it. So you stopped it? Yes, ma'am. Evelyn sat back. Her face did not change, but Annie saw the pride arrive and hide itself under concern. And now? Now they found records. Invoices. Fake signatures. Payments to Gerald's company. Maybe 7 months of it. Maybe more. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. You wrote it down. Annie nodded. That old notebook? Yes, ma'am. Evelyn reached across the table and touched the cover with 2 fingers. Told you paper remembers better than people. That was when Annie's eyes burned. She had held herself together in the kitchen, in the office, in front of Nathaniel Whitmore and Margaret Voss and Gerald Pike. But sitting at the table where she had done homework as a child, with Evelyn's hand on the notebook, she finally felt how tired she was. Evelyn saw it. Go wash, then sleep. Tomorrow they'll try to make this smaller than it is. Annie looked up. How do you know? Because that's what people do when the truth costs money. At 10 the next morning, Annie returned to Marrow and Tide in the same black pants and work shoes, with a clean shirt and the notebook in her bag instead of her apron pocket. Nathaniel had told her not to come in at 5:30, but her body still woke before sunrise. She had slept less than 4 hours and dreamed of scallops under glass, each one stamped with somebody else's name. The restaurant looked different in daylight after a crisis. The front windows were bright. The tables were set for lunch, though lunch service had been canceled. A printed sign on the front door read, "Closed for private maintenance." Annie knew enough now to understand that maintenance could mean anything a company needed it to mean. A security guard stood at the host stand. He nodded at her. Miss Carter? Annie was still not used to that. Yes, they're in the private dining room. She walked through the empty dining room slowly. Without guests, the place felt less grand and more exposed. White tablecloths waited without conversation. Wine glasses stood in rows. The harbor light came through the tall windows and touched every polished surface Gerald had used like a costume. In the private room, Nathaniel sat at the head of the table with Margaret Voss, Rebecca Haynes on a laptop, Chef Nolan, Luis, Miss Darlene, and 2 people Annie did not know. One was a man from corporate accounting named Paul Sutter. The other was a woman with short blonde hair and a navy binder. Nathaniel stood when Annie entered. That made everyone else look up. Good morning, Miss Carter. Good morning, sir. The blonde woman smiled, not warmly exactly, but professionally. I'm Dana Whitfield, Food Safety and Supplier Compliance for Whitmore Dining Group. Annie sat in the chair Luis pulled out for her. She whispered, Thanks. He said, You look like you slept in a mailbox. You look worse. Fair. Rebecca's voice came from the laptop. Let's begin. Overnight, we preserved local records, scanned 7 months of invoices, suspended Gerald Pike's access, and sent notice to Harbor Crown Imports not to destroy or alter documents. This morning, we need supplier response, customer complaint review, and employee statements. Paul Sutter pushed his glasses up. Corporate accounting confirms payments to Harbor Crown increased 38% over the last 2 quarters, while reported premium menu sales did not rise at the same rate. That should have triggered review. Nathaniel looked at him. Why didn't it? Paul swallowed. The increases were approved locally by Mr. Pike and coded as supply volatility. Margaret said, convenient phrase. Dana opened her binder. I spoke with Harbor Crown's main office at 8:30. Vivian Cross is their regional account director. She claims all substitutions were authorized by Marrow and Tide management due to market shortages. Chef Nolan looked up. Authorized by who? Dana checked the page. Gerald Pike. Luis muttered. Of course. Annie kept still, but her hand moved toward her bag where the notebook was. She did not take it out yet. Nathaniel noticed anyway. You have something? Maybe, Annie said. Last month, Vivian came in with the driver. She said the premium shipment had been delayed, but Gerald told her to put it through as normal because the menu was already printed. Dana leaned forward. You heard that? Part of it. They were near the back door. I was labeling herbs. Did you write it down? Annie opened the notebook to a page in May. I wrote. Vivian says delayed. Gerald says, put through normal. Driver laughs. Margaret looked at Rebecca on the screen. That helps, Rebecca said. It helps if corroborated. We need the driver logs. Dana nodded. I'll request them. Before anyone could continue, the private room door opened. The security guard stepped in. Miss Vivian Cross is here. The room changed. Nathaniel's face did not move. Here, at the front, Says she came as soon as she heard there was confusion about last night's delivery. Luis looked at Annie. Confusion travels fast. Rebecca spoke sharply from the laptop. Do not let her near records. If you speak with her, do it in this room, with counsel present. Nathaniel nodded. Bring her in. Vivian Cross entered like a woman who had practiced staying calm in expensive rooms. She wore a tan coat despite the warm morning, pearl earrings, and a leather folder tucked under one arm. Her smile was careful. It touched no part of her eyes. Mr. Whitmore, she said, I was alarmed to receive your preservation notice. I came personally because Harbor Crown values this relationship. Nathaniel did not offer his hand. Sit down. Vivian sat, then glanced around the table. Her eyes passed over Margaret, Dana, Chef Nolan, Luis, Darlene, and finally Annie. They paused there just long enough. Annie knew that pause. It asked, Why are you in this room? Vivian turned back to Nathaniel. I understand a junior kitchen employee raised concerns about product labels. I'm sure we can clear that up quickly. Substitutions happen in premium supply. Your manager approved them. My suspended manager, Nathaniel said. Vivian's smile thinned. Suspended? Pending review. I see. Rebecca's voice came from the laptop. Miss Cross, this conversation is being documented. Do you consent to continue? Vivian looked at the screen. Of course. Dana opened a file. Harbor Crown billed marrow and tide for premium day. Boat scallops last night. The delivered product label underneath showed a different code. Explain that. Vivian folded her hands. Temporary substitution. Product was equivalent. Luis said. It wasn't. Vivian glanced at him. And you are? Luis Ramirez. Cook who smelled it. The room stayed quiet. Dana continued. Equivalent product would still match the approved substitution records. We don't have those. Vivian looked at Gerald's empty chair as if he might appear to save her. Gerald maintained those locally. Annie spoke before fear could talk her out of it. Then why was my name signed on the receiving slip? Vivian turned to her. I'm sorry? My name? It was spelled wrong. A small crack appeared in Vivian's composure. I wouldn't know who signed at the restaurant. Annie opened her notebook. You were there on May 12th when Gerald said to put the delayed shipment through as normal. Vivian's eyes sharpened. I don't know what you think you heard. I wrote what I heard. Vivian gave a small laugh. Honey, writing something in a notebook doesn't make it true. Darlene leaned back in her chair. Funny. Men been using notebooks to run companies for 100 years. Margaret's mouth twitched. Nathaniel looked at Annie. Read the entry. Annie did. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. Date. Time. Vivian's name. Delayed shipment. Gerald's instruction. Driver present. Dana wrote quickly. Rebecca asked, Miss Cross, can you provide the name of the driver assigned that morning? Vivian hesitated half a second too long. Annie saw it. So did everyone else. I'd have to check dispatch. Vivian said. Nathaniel leaned forward. Check now. Vivian's fingers tightened on the leather folder. Mr. Whitmore, I think we should pause until Gerald Pike is present. He handled the account relationship. Nathaniel's voice stayed calm. That relationship is exactly what concerns me. Vivian looked around the room again, and this time her gaze did not skip over Annie. It settled there with something colder than dismissal. Annie understood then that Gerald had not been the whole problem. He had been the door inside the building. Vivian was the door outside it, and both of them had assumed no one at the back entrance would ever write anything down. Vivian Cross did not leave when the questions turned sharper. That was the first thing Annie noticed. Gerald had fought like a man protecting a locked drawer. Vivian fought like a woman who believed the whole table might still be persuaded to look somewhere else. She opened her leather folder and removed 3 documents. These are substitution approvals from the past quarter. You'll see Mr. Pike's initials on each one. Dana Whitfield took the papers but did not lean back. These aren't company forms. They're Harbor Crown internal forms. Then they don't authorize substitution for our kitchen. Vivian's smile held. They document that your local manager was informed. Rebecca Haynes spoke from the laptop. Miss Cross, informed and authorized are not the same thing. In practice, counsel, they often are. In court, they are not. A small silence followed. Annie looked down to hide the fact that the answer satisfied something in her. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, still and watchful. Where are the signed substitution approvals from Marrow and Tide? Vivian slid one page forward. As I said, Mr. Pike handled local approvals. That page has Gerald's initials, Margaret said. Not Chef Nolan's, not quality control, not corporate purchasing. Restaurant managers approve substitutions every day. Dana shook her head. Not premium, to lower grade substitutions billed at premium price. Vivian's smile faded by a degree. Lower grade is your interpretation. Luis leaned forward. No, it's a kitchen fact. Vivian turned to him. Mr. Ramirez, with respect, supplier classification is more complex than what a line cook sees on a box. Luis looked at her for a second. I've worked seafood longer than you've been lying about it. The room went still. Chef Nolan said. Luis. No, Chef, Luis said not loudly. I'm tired. We all smell it. We trim it. We sauce it. We act like the box says what the box doesn't say. And then somebody in a clean coat comes in and tells us we don't understand classification. Annie could feel the sentence move through the table. Luis had said what most of them had swallowed for months. Vivian recovered. This is exactly my concern, Mr. Whitmore. Emotions are running high. Hourly employees are making broad accusations based on kitchen pressure. Annie knew that turn. She had heard it from Gerald, from school administrators, from adults who wanted the room to think the problem was the person speaking, not what had been spoken. Nathaniel's gaze stayed on Vivian. Hourly employees stopped my restaurant from serving questionable food last night. Vivian looked at him. Or they disrupted a critical investor dinner over a misunderstanding that your manager could have resolved quietly. Quietly, Margaret repeated. That seems to be the word everyone involved prefers. Vivian ignored her and turned toward Annie. Miss Carter? Is it? Annie nodded once. How long have you worked here? 4 months. And before that, where did you receive training in seafood grading, import pricing, supplier compliance, and commercial purchasing? The words were polite. The meaning was not. Annie felt every person at the table waiting. She could have said she had no formal training. That would be true. Gerald would have wanted that answer. Vivian wanted it too. Instead, she said, at the back door. Vivian blinked. Excuse me? I learned what came in because I carried it. I learned what was fresh because I washed it, smelled it, labeled it, and watched Luis and Chef work with it. I learned prices because they were on the invoices I was told to sort. I learned the codes because they kept changing. Vivian gave a thin laugh. That is not training. No, Annie said. It's work. Darlene nodded once from the side of the room. Vivian looked to Nathaniel, as if appealing to a shared class of people above such talk. Mr. Whitmore, with respect, you are allowing a young employee to confuse lived familiarity with professional qualification. Nathaniel's answer came slowly. Sometimes professional qualification is what people use after lived familiarity catches the lie. No one moved. Vivian's face cooled. If that is the posture you're taking, Harbor Crown will need counsel present before further discussion. Rebecca spoke. Wise choice. Until then, please preserve all records relating to Marrow and Tide. Gerald Pike, Pike Hospitality Consulting LLC, substitutions, credit memos, delivery assignments, and driver logs. Written notice has already been sent. Vivian gathered her papers. Harbor Crown has always acted in good faith. Annie looked at the forms in Vivian's folder and thought of the sour scallops, the misspelled names, the soft truffles, the olive oil seal half lifted from the cap. Good faith doesn't need fake signatures, Annie said. Vivian froze. It was not a loud sentence. It was not dramatic. But it cut because everyone knew it did not reach beyond the facts. Vivian turned toward her. Be careful, young lady. Darlene's chair scraped back a little. She has been careful. That's why we're sitting here. Nathaniel stood. Miss Cross, security will escort you out. My legal team will speak with yours. Vivian's smile returned, but now it looked like something made of wire. You should consider what this will do to your expansion talks. I am, Nathaniel said. I'm also considering what would have happened if a guest got sick at my table. Vivian left without another word. Security walked her through the dining room, past the empty tables and the front windows where morning light touched the harbor. Annie watched until she disappeared. The room exhaled, but not with relief. Margaret closed the folder Vivian had left for review. She's going to blame Gerald, Rebecca said. Gerald will blame her. Good, let them. Dana tapped her pen against the binder. We still need supplier records. Driver logs, substitution history, temperature chain, and all communications. Nathaniel looked at Annie. Can your notes identify driver names? Some, not all. Show us. Annie opened the notebook again. By now, she no longer felt embarrassed by the grocery lists or bus times between the delivery notes. Let them see it. Let them see that the same notebook that carried reminders about Evelyn's prescriptions also carried the record of a restaurant's back door. Working people did not get separate books for separate lives. Everything important went in the same place. She read through dates. April 3rd, driver Leon. May 12th, driver name looked like T. Bell on the badge. June 6th, different truck. No badge. Vivian present. July 2nd, driver wouldn't give name. Gerald signed. Dana wrote each one down. Paul Sutter from accounting opened another spreadsheet. If we map driver changes to price changes, we may see when Harbor Crown started routing the lower grade product. Louise said, check weeks Gerald wasn't here. Everyone looked at him. He took vacation in February, Louise said. 2 days in Savannah, I think. Product came in clean that week. I remember because Chef stopped complaining. Chef Nolan frowned, then nodded. He's right. Annie flipped to February. The codes match that week. Margaret looked at Nathaniel. So the scheme may require Gerald's direct approval. Or his absence disrupted it, Rebecca said. Nathaniel rubbed one hand over his jaw. Keep building the timeline. They worked through the morning. The canceled lunch service gave the dining room a strange hush. Staff came in, expecting prep, and found lawyers, security, and accounting at the private table. Some whispered, some avoided Annie's eyes. A few gave her quick nods when Gerald was not there to punish them for it. At noon, one of the younger servers, Kayla, stopped by the doorway. Annie? Annie looked up. Kayla held a folded paper. I don't know if this matters, but Gerald made me rewrite a guest complaint in April. The original said the shrimp tasted spoiled. He told me to change it to guest disliked seasoning. I kept the first copy because it felt wrong. She handed it over and left before anyone could ask questions. Darlene watched her go. One voice makes room for another. Annie unfolded the paper. The original complaint was dated April 2nd. The same night Margaret had found in the logs. Guest reported stomach upset after oyster special. Gerald marked, resolved. Nathaniel took the paper, read it, and looked toward the empty dining room. How many people have been carrying pieces of this? Enough, Darlene said. Just not enough felt safe saying it. That answer hit Annie harder than she expected. She had thought she was alone because no one else knew. Maybe many people had known pieces. They had just been trained by rent, schedules, managers, and fear to keep their pieces small. Rebecca's voice came from the laptop. Mr. Whitmore, you need to prepare for disclosure. Internally first, possibly publicly. If Harbor Crown or Pike tries to shape the narrative, you cannot be behind them. Nathaniel looked at Margaret. Investors? Waiting, she said, concerned. Not gone yet. Then they hear it from me. Margaret nodded. And Annie? Annie looked up. Nathaniel said, she stays out of the investor conversation unless she chooses otherwise. That surprised her. Why? Because last night you were forced into the open. Today you get a choice. For a moment, Annie did not answer. Choice was a strange thing when you were used to being assigned. Luis leaned back in his chair. You don't owe rich people a presentation, Darlene added. But if you decide to speak, speak plain. Annie looked at her notebook, then at the folded complaint Kayla had brought. Then at Nathaniel. If they're going to hear what happened, they should hear where it started. Nathaniel studied her. At the back door? Yes, sir. Margaret closed her pen. Then we prepare. By 1 o'clock, the private dining room had been reset. Not for a meal, but for a meeting. No candles, no wine. Just water glasses, folders, and a screen. The investors returned with cautious faces. Vivian was gone. Gerald was gone. Harbor Crown was silent, but the damage remained on paper, waiting to be explained. Annie stood near the side of the room with Luis beside her and the notebook in both hands. Nathaniel opened the meeting. Last night, an employee stopped an unsafe course from reaching this table. What we found afterwards suggests supplier fraud, internal misconduct, and possible food quality failures. We are not hiding that from you. One investor shifted. Margaret Voss sat still, watching. Nathaniel continued. Before we discuss money, you need to understand something simpler. This company was warned by the person closest to the product and almost failed to listen. He turned slightly toward Annie. The room waited. Annie stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone on the table caught it. I work receiving, she said. Most mornings, I see the food before anyone in a suit sees a report. She opened the notebook to the first marked page, and for the second time in 24 hours, Annie Carter began telling powerful people what had come through the back door. The room did not feel like a dining room anymore. The long table that had held wine glasses and tasting plates the night before now held folders, printed invoices, sticky notes, water glasses, and Annie's old notebook. The investors sat where they had eaten dinner. Nathaniel sat at the head. Margaret Voss sat to his right. No longer just an investor, but a witness to the whole unraveling. Luis stood near the wall with his arms folded, trying to look casual and failing. Annie kept both hands on the notebook so they would not shake. She started with the truck. Wednesday morning, the invoice said the seafood arrived at 5:40, she said. It didn't. I was there at 5:30. The truck came at 7:12. A man with silver hair and a red tie leaned back. Could that be a clerical error? Yes, sir, Annie said. One time, maybe. She turned a page. But it happened again on April 10th, April 24th, May 8th, June 6th, and last night. The delivery time on paper came before the truck. Sometimes before the employee listed as receiving it had even clocked in. Margaret slid copies down the table. Schedules are attached. The room quieted as the investors looked. Papers had a way of taking the air out of easy doubt. Annie continued. Then the product codes. The invoices billed premium items. Day, boat scallops, fresh Maine lobster, imported truffles, extra virgin olive oil, but the codes on the boxes, or under the stickers, showed different products. The woman from Atlanta, a former hotel executive named Claire Benson, studied one page. Were the substitutes unsafe? Not always, Annie said. Some were just cheaper. Some were poor quality. Some had temperature problems. The scallops last night smelled sour before they were cooked. Luis spoke from the wall. I checked them too. Claire looked at him and nodded. Thank you. That small thank you settled something in Annie. Luis deserved to be heard too. The red tie investor tapped one invoice. But how do we know these aren't normal substitutions? Restaurants deal with shortages. Dana Whitfield answered this time. Normal substitutions are documented, approved, and priced accordingly. What we have here shows lower-grade items billed as premium. In several cases, the receiving signatures appear forged. Annie opened her notebook to the page with her copied signature. My name is Carter. On the form, it says Carter. I didn't sign it. A few eyes moved toward her, then away. Annie knew that look. People did not like staring directly at someone who had been used. Nathaniel leaned forward. Miss Carter, tell them what you told us about signatures. Annie swallowed. A bad shipment doesn't become official until someone signs for it. If the food is wrong and the paperwork still says it's right, the signature is the doorway. No one spoke for a moment. Claire Benson wrote that down. The red tie investor looked less certain now. And Mr. Pike? Margaret placed the credit memo in front of him. Supplier credit issued to Pike Hospitality Consulting, LLC, Gerald Pike's private company. That's preliminary, Rebecca Haynes said from the laptop at the far end of the table. But it is enough to justify suspension, full internal review, supplier notice, and possible referral to authorities. The red tie investor looked at Nathaniel. You understand what this means for expansion? Nathaniel did not blink. I understand what hiding it would mean. Public disclosure could damage the brand. Serving bad food would damage it more. The investor shook his head. Customers forgive price issues faster than safety concerns. Nathaniel's voice stayed calm. Customers should not have to forgive safety concerns. Annie looked at him then. Not as a billionaire. Not as the man whose name sat on the building. As someone who had finally said the simple thing out loud. Claire Benson closed the folder in front of her. I want to know why this young woman had to force the issue. Where was management? Chef Nolan's face reddened. Some of us saw pieces. We didn't put it together. Darlene, seated near the back because Nathaniel had asked her to stay, said, "Some put it together enough. They just knew the cost of saying it." Claire turned toward her. "And you are?" "Darlene Price. Glassware, service support, schedules when the system acts foolish." A short silence followed. Then Claire nodded. "Go on." Darlene folded her hands. "People at the bottom know plenty, but knowing doesn't pay rent if the person above you can cut your hours. So folks learn to say less than they see." Annie felt that sentence in her chest. Nathaniel did too. She could tell by the way his gaze dropped to the table. The red-tie investor said, "This is all very moving, but we need to discuss liability." Darlene looked at him. "Baby, liability is just a rich word for what happens after somebody ignores a warning." Luis coughed once into his fist. Annie bit the inside of her cheek. Margaret Voss did not hide her smile. Rebecca cut in before the room could drift. "Liability is exactly why we need disciplined action. The company will document the issue, preserve evidence, suspend implicated parties, test product samples, notify appropriate authorities if required, and review customer complaints. That is the path that protects the company because it protects the truth." Nathaniel looked at the investors. "Expansion pauses until we know how far this goes." That changed the room more than anything Annie had said. Money had finally been given a consequence. The red-tie investor leaned forward. "You're pausing voluntarily?" "Yes. That may cost millions." "It may," Nathaniel said. "And you're doing that based on a kitchen worker's notebook?" Nathaniel looked at Annie, then back at him. "I'm doing it because that notebook matches invoices, schedules, product codes, complaints, and a supplier payment trail. If you want me to ignore evidence because of who found it, then you're not the partner I thought you were." The sentence landed hard. Claire Benson closed her pen. "I support the pause." Margaret Voss nodded. "So do I." The red-tie investor looked around, realized the room had moved without him, and leaned back. Annie let out a breath she had been holding. The meeting lasted another hour. Most of it was words she had heard only on television. Exposure. Review period. Contractual pause. Communication strategy. Supplier breach. Independent audit. But every time the conversation drifted too far into polished language, someone brought it back to the back door. Delivery time. Product code. Signature. Smell. Plate stopped before service. At the end, Nathaniel stood. "Thank you for staying." The investors rose. Some shook his hand. Claire Benson stopped near Annie. "You're 18?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. My first job was folding towels in my aunt's motel outside Macon," Claire said. "People assume you learn business in boardrooms. You learn a lot in laundry rooms, too." Annie did not know what to say. So she said the safest thing. "Yes, ma'am." Claire gave her a small card. "If anyone makes you feel foolish for what you did, call me, and I'll remind you they're wrong." After the investors left, the private room felt larger and emptier. Annie sat down for the first time in over an hour. Her knees had started to ache. Luis took the chair beside her. "You did good. I talked too much." "No. You talked enough." Nathaniel stood near the window, looking out at the harbor. Margaret and Rebecca spoke quietly near the laptop. Dana was already building a testing list. Chef Nolan had gone to check the sealed product. Darlene came over and placed a fresh glass of water in front of Annie. "Drink. You keep saying that, and you keep needing it." Annie drank. Nathaniel turned from the window. "Miss Carter, I need to ask something." Annie set the glass down. "Yes, sir? Would you be willing to continue helping the review? Paid hours, not kitchen prep, documentation, receiving notes, product identification with Dana and accounting." Annie looked at Luis, then Darlene. "Am I qualified for that?" Darlene made a sound. "Child, after last night, don't insult yourself." Nathaniel said, "You are qualified to explain what you saw. We'll bring in people qualified for the rest." Annie nodded slowly. "Then yes, sir." Before he could answer, security appeared at the doorway with a phone in hand. "Mr. Whitmore, there's an issue." Nathaniel's face tightened. "What issue?" The guard looked uncomfortable. "Local reporter called the front desk. Says they received a tip about spoiled seafood being served to investors last night." The room stilled. Luis Muda. "Gerald." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Or Vivian." Rebecca's voice came from the laptop. "Do not respond casually. We prepare a statement." The guard added, "There's more." The reporter asked if an employee named Annie Carter caused a disruption in the kitchen. Annie felt the blood drain from her face. There it was. The old story, already being shaped. Not forged signatures, not inflated invoices, not a manager taking supplier money, a young black kitchen worker causing a disruption. Nathaniel looked at Annie, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something like apology in his eyes before he said a word. Margaret closed her folder. They're trying to make her the headline. Darlene's voice went low. Of course they are. Annie looked at the notebook on the table. The pages were still open, the handwriting still there, the facts still facts. But outside the room, someone had begun turning the truth into something easier to dismiss. Nathaniel picked up his phone. Rebecca, draft the statement. Margaret, call communications. Dana, secure testing. Luis, chef. No one talks to press without counsel. Then he looked at Annie. You do not have to stand in front of this. Annie heard the offer. She understood it was meant kindly. But she also heard the reporter's question. Employee named Annie Carter. Disruption. The story had already found her name. Hiding would not make it forget. She looked at Darlene, who gave the smallest nod. Not pushing. Just reminding her she still had a choice. Annie closed the notebook. If they're going to use my name, she said, then they don't get to tell the story without what I wrote down. Rebecca drafted the first statement in 12 minutes. It was clean, careful, and useless to anyone who wanted a human answer. Nathaniel read it once from Margaret's laptop. This says we are aware of a potential supplier documentation irregularity. Rebecca's voice came through the speaker. That is legally accurate. It sounds like we misplaced a receipt. That is why lawyers write statements before reporters write lawsuits. Margaret folded her arms. She's right legally. She's wrong practically. Rebecca did not take offense. I am not wrong. I am incomplete. Annie stood near the sideboard, the notebook pressed under one hand. She had not planned to be part of a public statement. Yesterday morning, her biggest fear had been Gerald cutting her hours. Now people outside the restaurant were asking for her name. The reporter had called twice more. The second time, he said he had a source claiming a disgruntled kitchen worker had interrupted a private investor dinner with unsubstantiated allegations. The words had Gerald's fingerprints all over them, even if Vivian had been the one to pass them along. Louis stood by the doorway. Disgruntled, he said. That's what they call you when they don't want to say you were right. Darlene sat at the table with her glasses low on her nose. They'll call a young black girl angry before they call a grown man dishonest. No one corrected her, because there was nothing to correct. Nathaniel looked at Annie. Miss Carter, I meant what I said. You do not have to be in the statement. My name is already in their question, Annie said. That doesn't mean we feed them more of you. I know. She looked down at the notebook. But if you only say supplier irregularity, people will think it was paperwork. It wasn't just paperwork. Food almost went out. Rebecca spoke carefully. We cannot say unsafe food was served. It wasn't served, Annie said. That's the point. Margaret tapped her pen once. We can say an employee raised a food quality concern before service, and management stopped the course pending review. Nathaniel looked at Annie. Would that feel true? Annie thought about the plate in the server's hands, Gerald telling her to move, Nathaniel appearing in the kitchen doorway. It's true enough, but don't make it sound like management stopped it first. The room went quiet. Nathaniel took that without flinching. Fair. Darlene nodded at Annie, almost like a teacher hearing a student finally use her full voice. They rewrote the statement together, not with Annie giving legal language, but with her insisting on plain words when the others polished too hard. The final version said Marrow and Tide had paused service of a seafood course after an employee raised concerns about product quality and receiving discrepancies. It said Whitmore Dining Group had suspended the local manager pending review, preserved records, removed all products from the questioned supplier, and brought in outside food safety testing. It said no confirmed illness had been reported, but prior complaints were being reviewed. It said the company would cooperate with authorities if required. Then Nathaniel added one line himself. We are grateful to the employee whose attention prevented a potential failure of our standards. Annie read it twice. Rebecca said, I can live with that. Luis leaned toward Annie. Lawyer blessing, frame it. Annie almost smiled, but her phone buzzed before she could answer. Unknown number. She stared at it until the screen went dark. Darlene saw. Don't answer. Another buzz. This time a text. You have no idea what you stepped into. People like you get used. Annie's hand tightened around the phone. Luis moved closer. What is it? She showed him. His face changed first with anger, then with restraint because Nathaniel was watching. Forward it to Rebecca, Nathaniel said. Annie looked at him. It could just be somebody messing around. Rebecca's voice sharpened. Forward it. She did. A minute later, Rebecca said, Do not delete it. Do not respond. Screenshot it. We add intimidation to the file. Annie did as she was told. Her hands were steadier than she felt. Margaret looked at Nathaniel. This is no longer just supplier fraud. No, he said, it isn't. At 3 in the afternoon, the statement went out. By 3:20, the local reporter posted the first story. The headline was not kind, but it was not the worst version either. Whitmore Dining Group investigates supplier after employee flags seafood concern. Annie's name was not in the headline. That was something. By 4, the comments had begun. Some praised the company for taking action. Some asked if the restaurant had been cheating customers. Some wanted to know which employee stopped the plate. A few said it sounded like a shakedown. One wrote, probably some girl trying to get attention. Annie saw that one before Luis took the phone from her hand. Don't read comments, he said. I know. No, you don't. People who don't know you will try to make you smaller for free. Don't help them. Darlene pointed at him. Listen to that man. The rest of the afternoon moved in pieces. Food safety inspectors from an independent lab arrived and collected sealed samples from the scallops, shrimp, truffles, and oil. Dana walked them through chain of custody. Margaret took another investor call. Rebecca arranged formal notice to Harbor Crown's legal department. Nathaniel called corporate and told them the review was expanding to every Whitmore restaurant that had purchased from Harbor Crown in the past year. That call was loud enough for half the room to hear. No, Nathaniel said into the phone. We're not limiting it to Charleston because that is convenient. If this supplier did it here, I want to know where else. A pause. Then his voice dropped. I don't care what it does to quarterly numbers. I care what happens if we find out later and look like cowards. Annie looked up at that. So did Darlene. After the call, Nathaniel stood at the window with one hand on his hip. He looked tired now, not polished tired, but human tired. Margaret joined him and said something Annie could not hear. He shook his head once. Luis leaned close. You ever think rich people get tired? Annie kept her voice low. I figured they hired people for that. Luis snorted. The small laugh helped. Only for a second, but Annie took it. Near 5, Chef Nolan asked Annie and Luis to come into the kitchen. He had gathered the staff who were still on site. Prep cooks, servers, dish crew, Darlene, 2 bartenders, the hostess, security, and a dishwasher named Marcus who had come in after hearing his name might have been used on a receipt. They stood in uneven rows beneath the fluorescent lights. Nathaniel came in last. No one clapped. No one spoke. He stood near the pass, the same place the scallops had almost left the kitchen. I owe you all an explanation, he said. Last night, product that should have been questioned was nearly served. Annie Carter stopped it. After reviewing records, we have reason to believe our former manager may have been involved in supplier fraud and falsified receiving documents. The word former moved through the room. Someone whispered, Gerald's gone? Suspended pending investigation, Nathaniel said. His access has been removed. No one is to contact him about company records. If he contacts you, report it. A server near the back raised her hand halfway. Are we losing shifts? Nathaniel looked at her. Not this week. You will be paid for scheduled hours while we review operations. That answer did more for the room than any speech could have. Shoulders lowered. People breathed. Marcus spoke next. My name was on something? Yes, Nathaniel said. Possibly forged. Legal will speak with you. Marcus looked at Annie. Not angry. More stunned than anything. You caught that? She caught a lot, Luis said. Nathaniel continued. This company failed to create a safe way for people to report what they saw. That changes now. Effective immediately, any employee can report product concerns directly to quality control or corporate compliance. No manager can override a food safety hold alone. No employee will be disciplined for raising a good faith concern. Darlene crossed her arms. Put that in writing. Nathaniel looked at her. We are. Good. A few people smiled, but softly. Then Nathaniel turned toward Annie. "Miss Carter, I said last night you were right to stop that plate. I'll say it here too. You protected our guests, our staff, and this restaurant." Annie felt every eye in the kitchen turn to her. This kind of attention was different from the one Gerald had put on her. It did not feel safe exactly, but it did not feel dirty. She did not know what to say, so she said the truth. "I didn't want anybody getting sick." Darlene's face softened. Luis looked down. Nathaniel nodded. "That should have been enough for us to listen sooner." After the staff meeting, people returned to small tasks. Not normal tasks, because nothing was normal yet, but things hands could do. Wiping counters, labeling safe stock, checking thermometers, making lists. Annie stayed near the pass for a moment, looking at the space where she had stepped in front of the server. Luis came beside her. "You okay?" "No." "Good. Means you're paying attention." She looked at him. "That's your comfort?" "It's what I've got." Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time the message said, "Gerald isn't the only one who can make sure you never work in this town again." Annie stared at it. The kitchen noise dimmed around her. Luis saw her face. "Annie?" She handed him the phone. He read it, then looked toward Nathaniel, who was speaking with Dana near the cooler. "Mr. Whitmore," Luis called. Nathaniel turned. Annie wished, for one tired second, that she had stayed at the sink, washed the greens, kept her head down, and let the rich people eat whatever they wanted. But the wish passed quickly, because she knew it was not true. She would have carried that plate in her mind for the rest of her life. Nathaniel read the message without touching the phone. His expression did not change much, but his voice did. "Rebecca," he said to Margaret, "tell council we're adding witness intimidation, and get security for Miss Carter's house tonight." Annie looked up. "My house?" "Yes. My grandmother is there. That's why." The words landed harder than the threat. Annie looked toward the back door, where deliveries came in, where this had started with a smell and a wrong label. She had thought the danger was inside the restaurant. Now it had followed her name out into the city. Darlene came over and put one hand on Annie's shoulder. "Baby, don't let fear make the decision for you." Annie held the phone in her hand, the message still glowing on the screen. "I'm scared," she said. Darlene squeezed her shoulder once. "I know. Courage usually shows up scared." Across the kitchen, the sealed container of scallops sat behind cooler glass. No longer food, not anymore. Evidence. Annie looked at it, then at Nathaniel. "Tell Rebecca I'll save every message," she said. Nathaniel nodded. Outside, the first evening lights came on over Charleston. Inside, Marrow and Tide. The truth had stopped being a kitchen problem. It had become something people were willing to threaten an 18-year-old girl over. And that told Annie one thing clearer than any invoice could. They were close. Security reached Evelyn Carter's house before Annie did. That bothered her more than she expected. The black SUV parked across the street looked too large for the block, too official beneath the porch lights and tired oak trees. Neighbors noticed. Of course they noticed. In North Charleston, people noticed a strange car the way kitchens noticed a broken rhythm. Evelyn was waiting on the porch in her robe, arms crossed. When Annie stepped out of Nathaniel's car, her grandmother looked first at her face, then at the security guard, then at Nathaniel himself, who had insisted on coming along despite Margaret telling him it was unnecessary. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Which one of you brought trouble to my house?" Annie almost smiled. "Grandma, I asked a question." Nathaniel stepped forward. "Careful. Not too close." "Mrs. Carter, my name is Nathaniel Whitmore. I own Marrow and Tide. I know who you are. Your picture is on the wall by the restrooms." Evelyn looked him over. "That doesn't answer my question." "No, ma'am. Trouble came because your granddaughter told the truth at my restaurant. I'm here because I should have made sure telling the truth was safer than it became." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. The street was quiet except for the low engine of the SUV and a dog barking 2 houses down. "You got money," she said. "Can money make men decent?" "No, ma'am." "Can it make cowards brave?" "No." "Then use it for locks, lawyers, and time. Those help." Nathaniel nodded once. "That's what we're doing." Only then did Evelyn step aside and let Annie in. Inside, the house smelled like tea and the lavender soap Evelyn kept by the sink. Annie set her bag on the kitchen chair and took out her notebook, phone, and the printed copies Rebecca had told her to keep in a folder. Evelyn watched every item land on the table. "You saving all of it?" Yes, ma'am. Good. Fear makes people forget. Paper doesn't. Nathaniel remained near the doorway, as if he understood this kitchen was not his room to command. A security detail will stay outside tonight. Rebecca Haynes will contact you about the threatening messages. If you want, we can move you and Mrs. Carter to a hotel. No, Evelyn said. Annie looked at her. Grandma, I said no. I spent 36 years cleaning hotel rooms. I'm not hiding in one because a thief got nervous. Nathaniel accepted that without argument. Annie respected him a little for it. He left a direct number on the table and told Annie to call any time. After he was gone, Evelyn locked the door and turned the deadbolt twice, though it only needed once. Annie sat at the kitchen table, phone beside her. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Evelyn filled the kettle. No, you don't believe that. I'm tired. That's different. They know where we live. Evelyn turned from the stove. Baby, men like that always know where people live. That's how they keep folks in line. The difference is, now somebody else knows what they did. Annie rubbed her eyes. I'm scared. I'd worry if you weren't. Evelyn brought 2 mugs to the table and sat across from her. Listen to me. Courage is not a feeling. It's a chore. Some days you do it with your hands shaking. Annie looked at the notebook. What if they twist it? They will. What if people believe them? Some will. What do I do then? Evelyn tapped the notebook. You keep the record straight. The next morning, Annie returned to Marrow and Tide with 2 security guards in the parking lot and a knot in her stomach. The restaurant remained closed to customers. A new sign on the door said staff training and supplier review. That sounded cleaner than the truth, but at least it was closer than maintenance. Inside, the private dining room had become a command center. Laptops lined the table. Folders sat in date order. Dana Whitfield had pinned a supplier map to a corkboard. Margaret Voss was on the phone near the window. Louis sat with a cup of coffee, looking like he had slept in his car. Miss Darlene had brought a grocery bag full of breakfast sandwiches from a church friend who, she said, cooked better than half the men calling themselves chefs. Nathaniel looked up as Annie entered. How's your grandmother? Mad. Darlene nodded. Then she's fine. Rebecca Haynes joined by video at 9 sharp. We have a problem. Nobody reached for coffee after that. Rebecca continued. Gerald Pike's attorney sent a letter this morning. Mr. Pike denies wrongdoing and claims he was suspended after raising concerns about improper conduct by a junior employee. Louis set his cup down. Improper conduct? Rebecca looked at Annie through the screen. He alleges you accessed confidential purchasing documents without authorization, disrupted service, damaged investor confidence, and made accusations beyond your role. Annie's mouth went dry. Nathaniel's voice was flat. He's blaming her. Yes, Rebecca said, and there's more. The local reporter received a longer statement from an unnamed source claiming Annie had been disciplined previously for attitude issues. Darlene's chair scraped. There it is. Margaret hung up and came back to the table. Press is asking for comment within the hour. Annie stared at the folders. For a moment, all she could hear was Gerald's voice. Jobs like this are not hard to lose. He had known exactly where to press. Not just her job, her name, her future, the version of her that strangers would meet before she walked into the room. Nathaniel looked at Rebecca. How do we answer? With evidence, Rebecca said. But not all of it publicly. We need enough to stop the false narrative without compromising investigation. Dana opened a folder. Testing preliminaries came in. The scallops show elevated spoilage markers. Not a full report yet, but enough to support that the product should not have been served. Chef Nolan, who had entered halfway through Rebecca's update, lowered his head. Thank God she stopped it. Annie heard him, but she could not feel the relief. The attack had moved too fast. Margaret said, "We need the cleanest sequence." Annie reported concerns. Gerald dismissed them. Annie stopped service. Records showed mismatches. Legal review began. Gerald was suspended after evidence emerged. Keep it simple. Rebecca nodded. And we include that Annie's notes were corroborated by invoices, schedules, product labels, staff witnesses, and preliminary testing. Nathaniel turned to Annie. Are you willing for us to use your name? Annie looked at him. They're already using it, not the same way. This would attach you publicly to the company's statement. Louis leaned forward. You can say no, Darlene added, and if you say yes, make them say your name right. Annie almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. She looked at the notebook. The cover was worn, the pages uneven, the rubber band tired from holding more truth than it had been meant to carry. Gerald wanted the world to see a kitchen girl causing trouble. Maybe some people would. Maybe nothing could stop that. But if her name was already outside, then she wanted it standing beside the facts, not hiding beneath his words. Yes, she said. Use my name. Nathaniel nodded. All right. Rebecca drafted while Margaret shaped the public language. The statement went out 40 minutes later. Annie Carter, a receiving and prep employee at Marrow and Tide, raised concerns about seafood quality and receiving discrepancies before a VIP course was served. Her concerns were corroborated by product labels, internal invoices, staff witness accounts, schedule records, and preliminary food safety testing. Gerald Pike was suspended after records revealed possible falsification of receiving documents and an undisclosed financial relationship involving a supplier. Whitmore Dining Group had referred the matter to outside counsel and would cooperate with authorities. It was not the whole story, but it was enough to change the ground. The reporter called again within 10 minutes. Then 2 more outlets. By noon, the headlines shifted. Young employees warning sparks. Fraud review at Charleston Fine. Dining restaurant. Not perfect, better. At 1 o'clock, Nathaniel gathered the staff again, this time in the dining room instead of the kitchen. Annie stood near Luis and Darlene, not hidden, not centered, just present. Nathaniel faced the room. Some of you may be contacted by reporters. You do not have to speak. If anyone pressures you, tell security or legal. If Gerald Pike contacts you, do not respond. Save the message. Bring it to us. A bartender raised his hand. Are we closing for good? No, Nathaniel said. We are closed until we can reopen honestly. That answer held. Then Kayla, the young server who had brought the complaint copy, stepped forward with another folded paper. I found one more. From May. A guest said the oil tasted rancid. Gerald told me to comp the appetizer and delete the note from the system. Dana took the paper, then Marcus came forward. I got a text from Gerald last night. He asked if I remembered signing receiving slips in April. Rebecca, on speakerphone, said, Do you? No, I wasn't working here in April. I started in May. The room shifted again. One by one, small pieces came forward. A bartender remembered Vivian dropping envelopes at the office. A dishwasher remembered Gerald throwing away labels before inventory. A server remembered complaints being rewritten. None of them had enough alone. Together, they began to sound like a door being forced open. Annie stood still, listening. Darlene leaned close and murmured, One voice makes room for another. By late afternoon, Rebecca had enough to contact the State Food Safety Office and the local prosecutor's Economic Crimes Unit. Nathaniel signed the referral himself. He did it at the same dining table where investors had eaten the night before. Annie watched the pen move across the page. Gerald had said a notebook from a kitchen girl would not save a billionaire. Maybe he had been partly right. The notebook alone had not done it. It had taken Louise telling the truth, Darlene keeping schedules, Kayla saving a complaint, Marcus admitting what he did not sign, Chef Nolan facing what he had allowed, Margaret refusing to look away, Rebecca turning fear into procedure, and Nathaniel choosing exposure over a clean lie. But the notebook had started it. Near 5, Nathaniel asked Annie to walk with him to the back door. The loading area was quiet now. No trucks. No crates. No Gerald pointing her back to the greens. He stood beside her, looking at the place where deliveries came in. My father started with one lunch counter, he said. He used to say you judge a restaurant by the door customers never see. Annie looked at him. Did you? No. He did not soften the answer. Not enough. She appreciated that he did not decorate the failure. After a moment, he said, I'm sorry, Miss Carter. She kept her eyes on the loading dock. For Gerald? For Gerald. For the fact that it took this much for me to hear you. For building a company where a young woman could be right and still be afraid to speak. Annie did not answer quickly. Forgiveness felt too large, and she was too tired to carry it for him. So she said, Then fix it. Nathaniel nodded. I will. Behind them, the kitchen lights hummed on. Ahead of them, the back door waited for the next truck, the next invoice, The next person no one thought would notice. Annie touched the notebook in her apron pocket. For the first time since the scallops, she felt the fear shift. It did not leave. It made room for something else. A record. A witness. A voice. And this time, when the world outside tried to ask who Annie Carter was, there would be more than one person ready to answer. By the next morning, Marrow and Tide no longer belonged only to the people inside it. News vans parked across the street before sunrise. A photographer stood near the corner pretending to shoot harbor traffic while aiming his lens at the restaurant door. 2 food bloggers posted videos from the sidewalk, pointing at the sign that still read Staff Training and Supplier Review, as if the paper itself might confess. Annie arrived through the back in a company car with Luis beside her and a security guard following at a distance. She had not asked for the guard. Nathaniel had not asked for permission. Evelyn had approved it by saying, "Good. Let them spend some money keeping you safe for once." Inside, the restaurant smelled of coffee, sanitizer, and stress. The kitchen lights were on, but no food was being cooked. Every counter had been cleared. Every cooler had a taped list. Dana Whitfield had turned the dry storage hallway into an inspection line. Safe products on the left. Questioned products on the right. Anything from Harbor Crown sealed, tagged, and logged. Annie stood at the threshold for a moment. The same place had looked ordinary 3 days ago. Now every label mattered. Every box seemed to ask who had touched it, who had signed for it, who had looked away. Luis nudged her. "You okay?" "No. You keep saying that. You keep asking." He nodded. "Fair." In the private dining room, Rebecca Haynes was already on the screen. Margaret Voss sat with 2 binders open. Nathaniel stood near the window, phone in hand. He looked like a man who had slept in pieces. Rebecca did not waste time. State Food Safety wants the sealed samples by noon. Economic Crimes wants copies of financial records by end of day. Harbor Crown's counsel responded. They deny intentional misconduct and claim any pricing or product issues were approved by Gerald Pike. Nathaniel's mouth tightened. So they're cutting him loose. They are trying to, Rebecca said. Gerald's attorney, meanwhile, claims Harbor Crown misled him. Luis sat down, rats arguing over who chewed the wire. Darlene, who had come in with a paper bag of muffins, set it on the table. "Don't insult rats. They know what they are." A few people laughed. Not because it was funny enough, but because they needed the room to hold something other than dread. Rebecca continued. "There's more. The reporter wants an interview. Not just with Mr. Whitmore. With Annie." Nathaniel looked at Annie before speaking. "No." Annie looked up. "You don't get to answer that for me." The room went quiet. Nathaniel took that in, then nodded once. "You're right. I apologize." Rebecca leaned closer to her camera. "Miss Carter, you do not have to speak publicly. If you do, they may edit you down to whatever fits the story they want. Even a fair reporter can simplify you." Annie knew that already. She had seen it happen on the news. A neighbor cries for 10 minutes, and the station uses 6 seconds. A mother explains a whole life, and the headline calls it an incident. "What happens if I don't?" she asked. Margaret answered. "Then the company speaks. We protect your name where we can, but Gerald's side may keep painting you as a disgruntled employee." Annie looked at her notebook on the table. It had been photographed, scanned, logged, and discussed by lawyers. But it still looked like what it was. An old notebook carried by an 18-year-old girl who had noticed too much. Darlene said, "You don't owe anybody your face," Luis added, "or your voice." Annie looked at Nathaniel. "But if only rich people talk, poor people stay evidence instead of witnesses." Nathaniel did not answer right away. That sentence had found him. Rebecca said, "If you choose to speak, we prepare. Short, plain, no speculation. You say what you saw, what you did, and why. What if they ask about Gerald? You say the investigation is ongoing. What if they ask about me causing a scene?" Luis muttered, "Tell them you caused a rescue." Rebecca almost smiled. "You say you raised a food safety concern before service because you believed the product should not be served." Annie breathed in. "Then I'll do it," Nathaniel said, with counsel present. "Here, no sidewalk ambush." Fina. The interview was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the dining room. Before that, the day became a march of procedures. Dana packed sealed samples into coolers with tamper labels. Annie helped identify which boxes matched which invoice codes. A state inspector named Mr. Albright arrived in a brown jacket and sensible shoes, the sort of older man who spoke softly because he expected people to listen. He did not treat Annie like a child. That surprised her. "You first noticed the scallops by smell?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Good. Nose is still one of the best tools in food safety." He marked his form. "Never let anybody make you apologize for using it." Annie looked at him. "Thank you." He shrugged. "Been doing this 31 years. Half my job is finding out who got ignored." While Mr. Albright inspected the sealed seafood, Rebecca and Margaret prepared Annie for the reporter. Nathaniel sat nearby but did not interrupt. The reporter's name was Joel Bennett. He was in his 40s, local, clean-shaven, polite in the way people were polite when they knew their questions could still cut. He arrived with one camera operator and agreed to record the full interview for company records. Annie sat in the dining room where the investors had eaten. A glass of water stood in front of her. Her notebook lay beside it, closed. Joel began gently. "Annie, can you tell us your job at Marrow and Tide?" "I help with receiving and prep. I wash produce, label containers, check deliveries when I'm asked, and help the kitchen get ready for service." "And on the night in question, what made you stop the seafood course?" "The product didn't match what the invoice said. The labels were wrong. The smell was wrong. I had reported concerns earlier, but they weren't acted on. When I saw the plates about to leave, I believed they should not be served." "Were you trying to embarrass the restaurant?" "No, sir. I was trying not to let anybody eat food I believed was bad." Joel paused. "Some sources have described you as disruptive." Annie's fingers touched the notebook, but she did not open it. Sometimes a warning sounds disruptive to the person who wanted silence. Behind the camera, Louise looked down at the floor. Darlene sat with both hands clasped in her lap, watching like a grandmother in church. Joel continued. "Did you understand the financial issues when you stopped the plate?" "No, not all of them. I knew the restaurant was paying for one thing and getting something else. I didn't know how much money was involved until the records were opened." "Do you believe your concerns were dismissed because of your age?" Annie looked at Rebecca, who gave nothing away. Then Annie looked back at Joel. "My age was part of it. My job was part of it. And yes, being a young black girl in the back of a fine dining restaurant was part of it too. People don't always say that out loud. They don't have to." The dining room seemed to hold its breath. Joel's voice softened. "What do you want people to understand?" Annie thought of Gerald pointing at the greens. Vivian saying a notebook did not make something true. Evelyn turning the deadbolt twice. Kayla bringing the old complaint. Marcus realizing his name had been used. Louise standing beside her before anyone else did. "I want them to understand that the people closest to the work usually see the problem first," she said. "If a dishwasher, prep cook, server, housekeeper, driver, or busboy tells you something is wrong, don't wait until someone with a title says the same thing. Listen early." Joel nodded. "Anything else?" Annie opened the notebook then, not to show every page, just to place her hand on it. "This isn't fancy," she said. "It's just notes, times, labels, smells, names." But it mattered, because the truth was written down before people started changing the story. The interview ended after 15 minutes. Annie felt as if she had been standing for hours. Joel thanked her and turned to Nathaniel for the company portion. Nathaniel did not sit. He stood near the table, sleeves buttoned now, face tired but clear. "My company failed Annie Carter before she helped protect it," he said. "We had a system that trusted titles over facts. That changes now." Joel asked, "Are you concerned this scandal will damage your expansion?" Nathaniel answered, "It should. If expansion depends on ignoring the back door, we don't deserve to expand." That line ran on the evening news. So did Annie's. Sometimes a warning sounds disruptive to the person who wanted silence. By sunset, the first arrests had not happened yet, but the first consequences had. Harbor Crown's largest regional client suspended orders. The state opened a formal review. Gerald's attorney stopped calling reporters. Vivian Cross issued a statement denying wrongdoing. But no one repeated it without mentioning the forged signatures. Inside Marrow and Tide, Nathaniel gathered the staff one more time. This time, he did not stand above them at the pass. He stood on the same side of the counter. "Gerald Pike is terminated," Effective immediately, he said. Harbor Crown Imports is suspended across the company. We are reopening only after every receiving procedure is rewritten and every staff member is trained on it. Scheduled wages continue. A few people exhaled. One server covered her mouth. Marcus whispered, "Thank God." Nathaniel turned toward Annie. Miss Carter, Louise, Miss Darlene, Kayla, Marcus, Chef Nolan, and everyone who brought information forward. Thank you. I cannot undo what you were put through. I can decide what happens next. Darlene raised a hand. And what happens next? Better be in writing. Nathaniel nodded. It will be. Later, when most people had gone, Annie stood by the back door. The loading dock was empty. The air smelled like rain and bleach. Luis came beside her with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "You're on TV now," he said. "I hate that. You did fine." I said black girl on camera. "You are one." "I know. I just heard myself say it." Luis sipped his coffee. Somebody needed to. Annie looked out toward the alley. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned all the space inside her. Other things had arrived. Anger, yes, but also proof, and people, and a door that had opened because she had refused to step away from a plate. Nathaniel approached quietly. He did not come too close. "Miss Carter," she turned. "The board wants a formal recommendation by tomorrow. I'm creating a quality control and receiving integrity role for this location first, then the whole group." Annie stared at him. "Sir, I'm 18. I'm aware. I don't have a degree. I have people with degrees who missed this." She did not know what to say. Nathaniel looked toward the dock. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering responsibility. You can say no. You can take time. You can have Rebecca review anything before you sign." That mattered. The part about not signing quickly mattered most. "I want my grandmother to read it," Annie said. A small smile touched his face. "I was hoping you'd say that." Luis grinned into his coffee. Annie looked back at the empty loading dock, where the next truck would come someday with new boxes, new labels, new chances for someone to lie or someone to notice. "Then bring it tomorrow," she said. Nathaniel nodded. Tomorrow, after he walked away, Luis raised his cup slightly, to the back door. Annie tapped her cup against his. "To the people who see it first," she said. 3 weeks later, the back door of Marrow and Tide opened at 5:38 inches the morning. And Annie Carter was already there. The truck driver stepped down with a clipboard in one hand and a thermal scanner in the other. He was new, or at least new to her. He wore a clean Harbor City seafood jacket, not Harbor Crown. His badge was visible. His truck seal was unbroken. Before he said good morning, he looked at the sign Nathaniel had posted beside the receiving entrance. "All deliveries must be verified by 2 employees. Product code, temperature, time, seal, invoice, and receiving signature must match before acceptance. Any employee may place a food safety hold without manager approval." The driver read it twice. Then he looked at Annie. "You the one I check in with?" Annie held out her hand for the clipboard. "I'm one of them." Louise stood beside her with a coffee in one hand and a thermometer in the other. "I'm the other." The driver nodded. "Works for me." Annie checked the truck seal first. She read the number aloud. Louise compared it with the invoice. Then she scanned the first seafood case. 35 degrees. Good. The product code matched. The harvest tag matched. The delivery time was written after the truck arrived, not before. The driver signed his name slowly, without complaint, and Annie signed hers beneath it. Carter. Not Carter. Not somebody's guess at her name. Carter. She looked at it for half a second longer than she needed to. Luis noticed. "Looks right. It is right. Then don't stare a hole through the paper." She gave him a look. "Do your job, Mr. Other One." He laughed and lifted the next case. The kitchen behind them had changed in ways a guest might never notice. That was the point. Guests saw candlelight, polished glasses, plates arriving with quiet confidence. They did not see the new receiving log clipped beside the cooler, the red food safety hold tags, the staff hotline posted in English and Spanish, or the morning checklist that required 2 names on every high-value delivery. They did not see Miss Darlene's paper schedules scanned into the system every Friday, with the originals still kept in a folder because, as she put it, computers are useful until they start lying. They also did not see Annie's new name badge. Annie Carter, Quality Control Associate. The first time Nathaniel handed it to her, she had stared at it until Evelyn took it from her hand and read the offer letter line by line at the kitchen table. Evelyn checked the wages, the hours, the tuition assistance, the reporting structure, and the sentence stating Annie could not be disciplined by local management for issuing a documented food safety hold. "This one matters," Evelyn had said, tapping the page. Annie had nodded. "That's what Rebecca said. Rebecca sounds expensive." "She is. Good. Expensive people should occasionally be useful." Evelyn signed as witness only after making Nathaniel wait in the living room for 34 minutes while she asked questions over the phone. Nathaniel answered every one. Annie had expected him to sound impatient. He did not. Later he told her it was the most thorough interview he had ever had for hiring someone. Evelyn had said, "Then your old interviews weren't good enough." Now, 3 weeks later, Annie checked the final case, marked the log, and placed the approved sticker across the corner. Luis carried the seafood inside. The kitchen was waking up around them. Chef Nolan called for stockpots. Kayla polished glassware near the bar. Marcus rolled clean mats toward the dish area. Darlene came through with a rack of cups and stopped beside Annie. "You eat breakfast?" Annie sighed. "Good morning to you too." "That wasn't what I asked." "Ayati." "What?" "A biscuit." "With what?" "Coffee." "That is not breakfast. That is a cry for help." Luis, passing with a crate, said, "I told her." Annie pointed at him. "You stay out of this." Darlene reached into her apron and handed Annie a wrapped egg sandwich. "Eat before you start acting like management." "I am not management." "You have a badge with 3 words on it." "That's how it starts." Annie took the sandwich because refusing Darlene was never worth the time. At 8 o'clock, Nathaniel arrived through the back door, not the front. He did that now on inspection days. He did not make speeches about it. He simply came where the work began. "Morning," he said. "Morning, sir." Annie replied. He looked at the receiving log. "Everything match?" "Seafood passed. Produce has 2 short cases of kale, but the driver marked it before I found it. No issue. Beef arrives at 9. Nathaniel nodded. "Good." He did not hover. He had learned that too. Trust did not mean staring over someone's shoulder and calling it respect. Before he left, he paused. "The state report is final." Annie set down her pen. "And? Scallops should not have been served. Elevated spoilage markers. Temperature abuse likely before delivery." Louise stopped moving near the cooler. Darlene closed her eyes once. Annie looked at the receiving table. It was clean now, almost painfully clean. "So I wasn't wrong." Nathaniel's voice softened. "No, you were not wrong." She had known that. The whole company had acted on it. Lawyers had said it. Inspectors had said it. But the final report did something different. It closed the small door doubt kept trying to leave open in her mind. "What happens to Gerald?" Luis asked. Nathaniel's face returned to business. "Investigation is ongoing. The prosecutor's office has opened a financial case. Harbor Crown terminated Vivian Cross. They're claiming she acted outside policy." Darlene snorted. "Companies always discover policy right after getting caught." Nathaniel did not argue. "We're pursuing civil recovery. Corporate audit found irregularities at 2 other locations. Smaller, but similar." Annie looked up. "Other restaurants?" "Yes. Your notes helped them know what to look for." That stayed with her, not because she wanted credit for more damage. She did not. But because she understood now that truth was sometimes like a loose thread. Pull it in one kitchen, and a whole seam opened somewhere else. At 10, before staff meal, Nathaniel gathered everyone in the dining room. The restaurant was reopening that evening for the first time since the scandal. No grand event. No influencers. No investors. Just reservations from regular customers who had called and asked if the staff was all right before asking about tables. Nathaniel stood near the center of the room. Annie stood by the side wall, close to Darlene. Old habits did not vanish in 3 weeks. "I won't keep you long," Nathaniel said. "Tonight we reopen. Not because everything is repaired, but because repair has to become practice. We have new receiving standards, new reporting rules, new supplier review, and outside audits scheduled. But none of that matters if people are afraid to speak." His eyes moved over the staff and stopped on Annie for only a moment. not enough to turn her into a display. This restaurant nearly failed because we confused authority with truth. We believed the person with the title over the people with the evidence. That cannot happen again. Chef Nolan stepped forward next. He had asked to speak, though Annie had not known what he would say. "I owe some of you an apology," he said. "I let pressure make decisions that should have been mine. When product looked wrong, I let Gerald's approval end the conversation. It shouldn't have. Annie, Luis, I should have backed you sooner." Annie looked at him. Luis nodded once. Chef swallowed. That's all. It was not all, but it was enough for the room. Staff meal that day was shrimp and grits, tomato broth, charred corn, and herbs. The replacement course from the night everything changed. Luis made it on purpose, but pretended he had not. Annie knew better. "This tastes familiar," she said. Luis shrugged. "Good food repeats when it has something to say." Darlene tasted it and pointed her fork at him. "Don't get poetic. Just cook." By 5, the dining room lights dimmed to evening gold again. Annie watched from near the server station as the first guests entered. An older couple from Mount Pleasant. 2 sisters celebrating a birthday. A retired teacher who had clipped the newspaper article and tucked it in her purse. She stopped near the host stand and looked toward the kitchen. "Is Annie Carter working tonight?" she asked. Kayla glanced back. Annie felt heat rise in her face. The woman smiled when she saw her. "I just wanted to say thank you." Annie walked over because there was no graceful way to hide behind the menu stand. The woman took her hand. "My husband and I have eaten here for anniversaries for years. I'm glad someone was watching." Annie did not know what answer fit all of that, so she chose the plain one. "Thank you, ma'am." The woman squeezed her hand once and went to her table. More guests came. Not all of them mentioned the story. Most didn't. They ordered, laughed, argued gently about wine, and asked whether the pecan tart was still on the menu. Life, Annie realized, did not always pause for justice. Sometimes justice had to fit itself into dinner service, payroll, bus schedules, and whether table 12 needed more water. Near the end of the night, Nathaniel called Annie to the pass. For 1 second, her body remembered Gerald's voice and tightened. Then she saw what Nathaniel was holding. A framed copy of the new receiving policy. At the bottom, beneath the official language, one line had been added in smaller print. "The back door is part of the table." Annie read it twice. "Who wrote that?" "Miss Darlene." Darlene, from across the kitchen, called, "And don't you forget it." Nathaniel placed the frame near the receiving entrance, not in the dining room, not where guests could praise it, but where the next tired worker with cold hands and a bad feeling would see it. After closing, Annie stepped outside through the back door. The air smelled of salt and pavement after rain. Luis came out with the trash, saw her, and set the bag down. "You thinking deep thoughts?" "No. Liar." She smiled a little. "I was thinking about the first day Gerald told me nobody cared what came through this door." Luis leaned against the wall. "They do now." Annie looked back at the door, at the new policy, at the logbook waiting for tomorrow morning, at her name badge clipped to her shirt. She thought of Evelyn's kitchen table, Vivian's cold smile, Gerald's threat, the reporter's microphone, the old notebook that had made people stop and read. Then she looked toward the quiet alley where the next truck would come. "They do now," she said. The lesson of this story is that truth often begins with the people others overlook. Annie was not powerful, wealthy, or protected by a title. But she paid attention when others chose comfort over responsibility. Her courage reminds us that doing the right thing is not always loud or easy. Sometimes it begins with a small note, a quiet warning, or one person refusing to step aside. The story also teaches that justice depends on listening to those closest to the work, especially when they have been ignored because of their age, race, or position. When one brave voice is finally heard, it can open the door for many others to speak. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.